Where is everybody? Yeah.
All right, Mr. Best, I have 7:30. Let's get started.
Well, welcome to the June 27th Transportation Commission. Before we get started, staff would like to congratulate Chairman Slatt on being reappointed. Item 1 is citizen comment. We have no speakers for item 1. Item 2 is the Army-Navy Drive project. John Lawler is here this evening to give you an overview, and we also have one speaker for this. John?
Hello, my name is John Lawler. I'm from Arlington County DES. I'm the project manager of the Army-Navy Drive Complete Streets project. This is a 0.8 mile long project in Pentagon and Crystal City. Basically starts at South Joyce Street and ends at 12th Street South. And the goal of the project is to make Army-Navy Drive a much safer street, improve the mobility for bikes, pedestrians, and bus users, as well as really just really making a nice complete street. So today, this is probably, it's one of the most unique streets in the county because it's, as you can kind of see in these pictures, it's just, we have missing crosswalks and curb ramps and pedestrian signals at traffic signals. You don't really see that throughout the county. The road used to be VDOT right-of-way. Some of it still is VDOT right-of-way. VDOT transferred some of the right-of-way to the county as part of the Columbia Pike streetcar. Back in like 2011. The county does maintain Army-Navy Drive, but parts of it, like I said, are still VDOT right-of-way. It has a 35 mile per hour speed limit. It's primarily just designed to funnel commuters to and from I-395. There's a heavy peak directional traffic. So what I mean by that is that, essentially when you look at your peak hour volumes, those don't kind of equate to the ADT traffic. Most of the traffic is during the peak hours. When you go there at like 11 a.m., for example, there's hardly anybody on the street. The intersection of Army-Navy Drive and South Hayes Street that had the second most collisions in Arlington County in 2016. It's typically ranked second or third in the county. There's no bike facilities at all. There's very minimal landscaping and very poorly defined sidewalks. Our goal is to redesign it as a complete street. To improve the safety, we're going to do that by narrowing the travel lanes, building a two-way cycle track along the south side, adding protected only left turn phasing at the signalized intersection. We're updating all the street lights and traffic signals, and we're going to plant a bunch of street trees. We're going to improve multimodal access, improve transit travel times and reliability, and we're really enhance Army-Navy Drive as a key entrance to Pentagon City and Crystal City, as well as reduce stormwater runoff. You can kind of, in the pictures on this slide, this is of the Fairfax Drive cycle track. It's kind of a short, one block cycle track between Glebe and Wakefield Street over on Marymount's campus in Boston. This, I believe, is the only curb protected two-way cycle track in the county at this time. So this, the cycle track we're building will look similar to this. We started our public engagement in December 2017. After our traffic model was approved by VDOT. We've reached a lot of people using a variety of tools and methods, such as like SurveyMonkey surveys, design workshops, open houses, meeting with the Bike Advisory Committee. So we basically received a lot of data from the community on input for the project. Based on our survey, 63% of respondents said they felt unsafe walking or biking along Army-Navy Drive. They had a lot of issues with how Army-Navy Drive connected to the surrounding bicycle facilities. Our original concept showed a 10-foot wide cycle track, and the public really wanted us to increase that to the 12-foot wide, which is the NACDO preferred standard, as well as add protected intersection elements where possible. They also wanted us to reduce right hook conflicts with vehicles and improve the street lighting. And just kind of one other interesting factoid was that 72% versus 15% supported reducing vehicle travel time in order to improve transit speed and reliability. So I'll start by kind of showing you all the different sections. This is a 0.8 mile long project, so we'll just kind of go block by block. So this is the first block, Joyce Street to the mall. This is adjacent to the Pentagon Row and the South Hayes Street Pentagon parking lot. So on this section, we'll have curbside dedicated transit lanes. We always have the two-way cycle track along the south side. Here's an aerial view. There's the plan view. So we'll have a floating bus stop island here. I think this will be like one of the first of that style in the county. Basically, we're consolidating the Pentagon City Mall stop and the Harris Teeter stop at this location, and this will improve the transit speeds through the corridor. You can see the curbside bus-only lanes. The intersection of South Joyce Street and Army Navy Drive, we're fixing the missing bike lane link here along the Pentagon Row frontage. Currently, this block doesn't have a northbound bike lane, so we're addressing that issue. We're improving the lane alignments here so that vehicles going eastbound at Joyce are aligned to the proper travel lanes. At the Pentagon City Mall entrance, we're shortening the entrance throat length so that it's a shorter crossing for pedestrians. And also you can kind of see some protected intersection corner islands that we're adding in the southeast corner of the South Joyce Street intersection, as well as the southwest corner of the Pentagon City Mall intersection. On the north side of this picture is the WMATA Transit Center project. So their timeline's very similar to our timeline. So they're basically building a bunch of new bus stops with sawtooth bays on this side. So our dedicated transit lane really fits in nicely with that project. The next section, moving to the east, is between the Pentagon City Mall and South Hayes Street. Here's the aerial view of this section. So, on this section, we're adding a second left turn lane to turn into the mall. Our traffic model showed that in the morning peak hour, this turn lane was backing up onto I-395, and so that was causing a lot of gridlock and delays, and we're concerned about the safety issues of people getting rear-ended on the ramp, so adding that second left turn lane addressed all those situations. As a reminder, all the left turn phasing at the signals here are protected, so there is no conflict between the left turns and the crossing pedestrians and bicyclists. We also consolidated several of the Pentagon City Mall entrances into just one right-in, right-out intersection. Unfortunately, since we lost the raised median on this part, we're using flexi posts to restrict that left turn into that entrance. In the southwest corner of the Hayes Street I-395 ramp intersection, we're adding a bend out to really improve that setback distance for the bikes crossing there so that the vehicles really get good visibility. This intersection, we actually don't have a conflict between the right turn and the crossing peds and bikes because we're protecting, this is one of the only right turns so far that we know that we're protecting the phasing here. So when the right turn has the green arrow, there won't be any pedestrians going at this intersection. We also flipped the northbound bike lane and the northbound right turn lane here because bikes can't travel north onto the I-395 ramp, so that eliminates that right hook conflict here. Once again, we have the curbside dedicated transit lanes, and then they end on this block. The future Metroway buses will come up here, turn left, and then they'll turn around in the South Hayes Street lot and then come back and come down. Next section is Hayes to East Street, or Hayes to Fern Street, I mean. It's just kind of the same thing here. We have the cycle track along the south side, generally 2 travel lanes in each direction for moving traffic as well as turn lanes. Then at the South Fern Street intersection, we do another bend out, so we improve that visibility for bikes, as well as give cars it gives them that room to sit here and kind of wait for that gap and not feel pressured by the vehicles behind them to make that turn too quickly. Between Ferns and East Street, again, it's 2 lanes for traffic as well as turn lanes. Each street has other plans for continuing its protected bike lane network that we're tying into. However, these require the Penn Place development to widen this side of each street in order to get the proper roadway width for it. The Express Lanes project improved the north approach on each street and widened it out to add some turn lanes so that they could get people off the express lanes quicker. One important thing to note at the East Street, Army-Navy Drive intersection is that we're restricting the westbound left turn. This is because there wasn't much volume doing this movement, but basically our traffic model was showing that, when the people were coming off the Route 110 off-ramp, they were weaving with the traffic that was going west on Army-Navy, and the traffic going west on Army-Navy wanted to either go through or turn right onto Eads, so it was causing a lot of delays and safety issues, so we restricted that left turn. That's something the community hasn't been opposed to. Everybody's been in favor of that. So I'll talk about the final block, which is Eads between Eads and 12th. This block's much different from the other 4 blocks we've been discussing. Basically on this block, the vehicles per day drop drastically. It's only about 6,000 vehicles per day, whereas the other blocks are about 20,000 vehicles per day. So on this section, we're going down to 1 lane in each direction. The north side, we're adding a tour bus parking, so that's a 10-foot wide parking lane for the tour buses. That's to offset a lot of the tour bus parking losses that have happened throughout the rest of the county as a result of development projects or road diet projects and things like that. The fire department made us get rid of the raised median because they wanted 20-foot wide road clearance and stuff. So we had to do that. So basically we pushed the road as far to the north as possible. And that gave us a lot of room for this protected bike lane buffer on the south side. So that really gives vehicles a lot of room to queue up. They can basically, pull around, stop here, wait for a gap on that cycle track, and then cross the cycle track to turn into the hotel or 400 Army-Navy Drive. Most of these accesses are right-in, right-outs, or outbound only accesses on this section here. And then the intersection of 12th and Army-Navy will be signalized by the 12th Street project, which you can see there. And so that's the end of the project. For streetlights, we're following the approved county streetlight management plan and doing overhead teardrops that will be county maintained. Streetlight was important to all the folks we talked to, so we'll be replacing all the streetlights in the project area with these. We haven't decided yet, if they'll go in the medians or in the bike lane islands or where. But here's where we are in the schedule. So we did the community open house earlier this week, and tonight I'm presenting to you all. Basically after that, we're kicked off the value engineering study for this project. So we have federal funding, so we have to do a lot of extra requirements that most projects don't have to do. So we have to do value engineering. Our plans also go through VDOT central office because the project is $18.5 million, so it's over that $15 million construction threshold. So therefore, we have to do the NEPA analysis because of the federal funding. So we're hopeful to do the environmental public hearing in the fall and then finalize that 30% design plan by the end of the year and get the 90% started. And then 2020 will be pretty much finishing up all the design work and acquiring our easements. Then 2021 we'll be preparing the construction bid documents and getting our federal authorization to advertise the contract for construction. Then so therefore we hope to start construction in late 2021, and we anticipate that the project will take about 2 years to complete. And here's the link to the project website. We're opening the comment period on the 30% design plan tomorrow, so we have just like a short 3-question survey. Then we're trying out like a new tool where people can go in and add comments on the actual design plan. So any questions?
Mr. Best, I believe we have a speaker on this item.
That's correct. We have one speaker. It is Phil Dales.
Good evening, Chairman Slatt and members of the commission. Phil Dales, Walsh, Colucci, Lubli, and Walsh on 2200 Clarendon, Suite 1300. Here tonight on behalf of Federal Realty, and generally, I want to start by saying that Federal Realty very much supports the Complete Streets project, and we think it'll be a gain for everyone to have safe, well-functioning streets that support multimodal transportation. But specifically with regard to one issue, and that's the access to the Harris Teeter Garage from westbound Army-Navy, the plan as it's proposed now would be very, very detrimental to the Harris Teeter, the residents, and the other retail in that part of Pentagon Row. In fact, we're concerned that closing the median there so that the left turn isn't permitted into the garage would put the viability of the grocery and retail in jeopardy. So I have a letter that I've put together as a way of providing two memoranda that Wells and Associates has prepared previously, not specifically for this meeting, but they'd already been completed. And it outlines our concerns. I think Mr. Best has passed that out. So the two memos are enclosed at the back of the cover letter, and the cover letter is a bit of a summary pointing out a couple of our main concerns. The memos also contain several possible alternatives to closing the median, which would prevent this access in. And rather than just discuss those options, those alternatives that would allow for continued left turn access from westbound Army-Navy, tonight I just wanted to make the commission aware of our concerns and our intent to participate in the ongoing design and hopefully work with staff on considering the alternatives that we've put forward and any others that might allow for both accomplishing the goals of the Complete Streets project and also not causing this harm to the Harris Teeter and the other retailers. So with that said, I'll thank you for listening to our concerns tonight and make myself available to staff over the next coming weeks, months. I think the goal that I saw at the open house was to have this at 90% design completion in early 2020. So I know now is the time that we want to be putting forward any of the alternatives that might allow us to prevent the harm to our tenants and the residents who use this access now. So thanks very much.
Thank you. All righty. Anybody have a question or a comment to start things off here on the, I feel like everybody is reading the the paper we were just handed about the Harris Teeter parking garage entrance. Commissioner Yari.
All right, good evening. Thank you, Mr. Lawler, for the presentation. I would just like to start by saying I am really excited for this project in general. It looks amazing, and I really hope to see more design like this spread throughout the county. But aside from that, I do have a few concerns, specifically with regards to some of the medians that are in the plan right now along Army-Navy Drive. Why aren't any of those median nubs or noses extended out past the crosswalks?
At several of the intersections, because it's VDOT right-of-way, we have to accommodate a WB 67 truck, semi-truck. So that's kind of the truck that delivers groceries to like stores like Harris Teeter, Whole Foods. And so when you do those auto-turn profiles, a lot of those median noses couldn't be there because you basically, if you want to have the north and southbound lefts going at the same time, they would overlap. So we basically tried to extend those wherever possible, but there just wasn't many locations. But that was a comment we got at the open house earlier this week, so we're going to take another look at it and see, kind of run it by VDOT again just to make sure, see if we can use a smaller design vehicle at several intersections or see what other options there are.
Okay, thank you. Another question then. So another thing I'm concerned about is in that stretch from Eads to 12th about cars making that left turn, making the left turn when they're going, whether they be about northbound, making that left turn. I'm worried about there being obviously conflicts there. I mean, what could be done to kind of ameliorate those or reduce them or just slow cars down making that left turn?
Sorry, are you talking about the movement from 12th to Army-Navy?
Yeah, so it's kind of hard to point this out.
The
Or just, I guess,
one
any of the left
down
turns
here.
in general throughout the entire corridor.
Okay.
There may be consideration of like raising the PBL in some of those places or.
So when we did the survey, we showed, we basically allowed everybody to decide between basically raising the protected bike lane at the driveway crossings and using green paint. versus just having an at-grade crossing with green paint, and it was like 59 to 41% favored just the at-grade crossing, so we were kind of surprised by that. But we also looked in the literature, and there really wasn't anything supporting that it necessarily was better to use the raised crossing versus the not raised crossing. It was a lot more complex from a design standpoint to do the raised crossing too.
Interesting. All right. And then last question, just another thing I'm a little bit worried about, some of the curb ramps, some of the diagonal curb ramps, especially the one like, let's say, I think it was on northeast corner of South Fern.
Okay.
Some of those are incredibly narrow.
Yeah.
And it would be really hard for folks to actually use them, and they're usually a very bad pedestrian experience for the people that use them. So it was just say wherever possible, it would be great to either widen them or be able to put 2 ramps in place or more ramps.
Yeah, I agree. Do you have a preferred width? Because I guess the county usually uses like
I don't have a preferred
6 foot.
width. Not an engineer, so leave it up to you.
Okay.
Big enough for a wheelchair.
Yes.
Commissioner Clement.
Yeah, I just want to question a point of clarification. Was this handout distributed to us online?
This Walsh-Colucci one?
Yeah, and also the presentation, the PowerPoint.
No, neither of them were
Okay.
made available in advance. But I mean, this was a public speaker that provided this
All
one.
right.
This was not staff.
Okay, so I'm concerned because I can't ask intelligent questions unless I've had a chance to review the documentation in advance of the meeting, which of course Richard Best is always very conscientious about distributing whenever he has it. I mean, it looks to me on the surface to be a great plan, but we have already someone coming in here who is a very well-established citizen who has serious concerns. I can't address his concerns because I haven't had a chance to review this material. Thank you.
Commissioner Price.
Mr. Lawler, I just also want to echo the comments. This is a fantastic project. It looks great from the start. It was talked about before, the concerns about left turns. Now, let's talk about right turns. As a commuter bicyclist, I'm always concerned about the dreaded right on red. I just, I feel like I take my life into my own hands every time I commute somewhere because some driver's not going to decide to stop. Have we thought about forbidding right on reds, or at least petitioning the state to forbid right on reds in this? Because I see a lot of conflict at a lot of these intersections.
That was a very popular comment earlier this week at the open house. So we're beginning the signal design at the end of the 30% design, so that's where we'll determine where those no turn on reds get placed. But obviously, that's definitely something that we'll want to restrict, at least on the the northbound approaches and hopefully the eastbound approaches as well. For the signal phasing, the only one we know for sure that will get the protected only right turn phasing, which is where you can only make the right on a green arrow and you'll be stopped by a red arrow the rest of the time, is the Hay Street intersection. The other signals we're thinking about possibly using some, one of the newer phasing types where you actually get like it's like a flashing yellow arrow for the right turn movement, and that would indicate that to those people that just kind of further reinforce that they have to yield. Yeah. So if we can't do the fully protected at some of the other intersections, we'll do that hopefully. So.
And just one more quick question. Have you thought about at the intersections a little bit, providing a little bit more space for queuing for bicycles, for those going straight as opposed to those turning?
Yep. We try to provide as much as we could. In the last go around, it is 12 feet wide, so it's pretty wide. Plus, you got the crosswalk area and stuff. So, but it's something we can take a look at again. It really works in conjunction with that, with the auto turn movements for the city buses and the trucks. Basically, any excess room, we could either use it for queuing space for the bikes or add more islands and things like that.
And last thing, as someone who's worked for the disability community, I really can encourage you, if there needs to be wider ramps, ADA accessible ramps, I encourage you to do that, make that happen.
Okay.
Thank you.
Commissioner Lantelmi.
I'd like to join the comments of Commissioner Price on the right turn on red. In fact, I would advocate for this entire corridor simply eliminating right on red. There's been writings recently questioning the whole idea of even having right on red in dense urban areas privileges cars over pedestrians. Here we have pedestrians, we have bicycles, we have other modes that are coming in. There's no reason any longer, I think, to have cars be privileged over every other mode by having the right on red. The whole point of red lights is to give order to the street. So I would certainly strongly advocate for, as you're doing this complete street, which I fully endorse, I think this is a great idea, let's go whole hog and get rid of all the right on reds at every intersection here in every direction.
Commissioner Wadsworth.
Yeah, excuse me, I agree with what they've just said also. Can you explain the streetlight part again? I think I
We
didn't quite
haven't begun the
understand that.
streetlight design. That usually starts later on. But the county did a streetlight management plan for the whole county. I guess it was like a 1.5-year effort, and basically they decided what kind of streetlight gets put in each corridor. And so the one selected in this corridor was the teardrop overhead light. And so it won't be Dominion maintained, it'll be a county maintained streetlight.
Are they going to be LED?
Yeah.
Okay. And with regard to the Welsh Colucci question, what is the Harris Teeter Garage? This is actually my neighborhood, my grocery store. I didn't know there, is that at the mall garage?
Pentagon Row.
It's the access to the garage at the far west end of Army Navy, right before the intersection with Joyce.
Okay. Got it. Yeah, thanks.
Cool. Actually, that tees up, I wanted to talk about that, or really left turns across the PBL in general. So I totally agree with staff that we want to be minimizing or eliminating those permissive left turns across the PBL. People just aren't expecting a bike to come up from behind them during a left turn. That is a big safety issue. So I see, it appears that there are some suggestions here about possibly like actually signal protecting that garage entrance with bike signals in a left turn, so that's an interesting option. I do want to agree with Walsh Colucci that I think having people pulling a U-turn on Army Navy to try and go back eastbound to get into the garage is probably not something that we want. That Joyce Street and Army Navy intersection is already going to have a lot for your average driver to keep track of. Once this thing is built, you've got two-way bike traffic on Army Navy, and some of them are going to want to go south on Joyce, and some of them are going to want to go north on Joyce, and some of them are going to want to continue west on Joyce, which requires swapping to the other side of the street. So between bikes going 4 ways and cars going a bunch of ways and pedestrians crossing and buses turning, there's going to be a lot going on there. I strongly suspect that after a multi-month adjustment period, people would just start using the other garage entrance for Harris Teeter off of Joyce by the surface parking lot. But should the county decide that it is appropriate to open that median back up to allow entrance to the garage, I really think we need to raise the protected bike lane in that instance to force cars to be going slower before they cross the PBL on the off chance there is a bike coming that they didn't see. And I feel the same way about the other permissive left that's allowed on the far east end. I believe it is the Doubletree entrance. The loading I don't worry so much about, but I believe that is a resident guest at the hotel entrance that also allows a left turn in there. So I think we've got to do everything that we can to slow cars that are crossing the PBL there. Anything else? All right, I just want to concur with my other commissioners that this is a fantastic project. I applaud staff for the amount of public comment that has already been incorporated since the 15% design, and I look forward to seeing it built.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, John. Next item is item 3, Community Energy Update. Rich Dooley is here this evening. We need probably 1 minute to load the PowerPoint, so we'll take a quick intermission.
All set? Very good. Thank you very much, Mr. Best, and thank you to all of you on Transportation Commission for your time tonight. My name is Rich Dooley. I'm the Community Energy Coordinator here in the county, part of the Rethink Energy team. And this presentation is, I'll give you a heads up that the Community Energy Plan, which was adopted a little over 5 years ago, now close to 6 years ago, has been undergoing a revision. And it is going as a request to advertise at the July County Board meeting for action by the board in September. So this is just a heads up as to this updated community energy plan going out as part of that RTA report. A quick public service announcement from our county manager's office. They impress upon us they'd like everyone to know that the census is coming up April of 2020. At least that's the plan. It's important that everyone be counted, and whether it's the reapportionment of House of Representatives or over $600 billion in federal funds being sent out to communities such as Arlington for roads and public works, it's important that everybody be counted. So through that website, there is an opportunity for the Transportation Commission or other organizations to become partners in this effort. So the County Manager's Office encourages this commission as well as the organizations that you work together with to go ahead and visit that website, become a partner, and become part of that effort. So for the presentation tonight, I'm going to move through it rather swiftly to allow more time for Q&A, and I see there's a lot on your overall agenda for tonight. But essentially, we'll talk a bit about the CEP, some implementation successes, and then proposed changes to the 2013 Community Energy Plan. Again, it was adopted as part of the comp plan. In 2013, it was adopted. And at that point in time, we focused on 3 different lenses as we went through the implementation process during the last 5 years. That's economic competitiveness, energy security, and environmental commitment. Quick heads up as to one additional lens through which we plan on looking into the future, or at least we propose to, and that's to include energy equity into our decision-making process. As you see there, the 6 different goal areas for the Community Energy Plan, transportation being one of them, and for district energy, through our integrated energy master plans done during the last 5 years, showing essentially a no-go decision to go ahead and develop public sector and publicly owned district energy systems. We've changed that chapter to focus on resilience throughout the community. The energy planning layer is one that we envision layering over the very smart and intelligent land use and transportation planning that's taken place over the last 50 years or so. And so, for instance, with the Master Transportation Plan, we fully embrace the idea of multimodal transportation that is espoused in the MTP. But in addition to that, we also recognize where people have to use vehicles. We're looking at electrification and the use of electric vehicles as a route for people to go. And that's what we're advocating as part of this plan update. There's been a lot of activity during the last 5 years, and this is just a sampling of some of the projects the entire AIR team has been the Rethink Energy team has been busy at working at, and so we continue to implement and we continue to forge ahead to help the community reach its goals. As part of those efforts during the time in which we've been implementing this from 2007 to 2017, the cost savings is just under $5 million per year from the community and the county government's perspective, and that's all related to AIR program outreach and various other activities and initiatives. And in addition to that, we've been able to drop our greenhouse gas emissions by 24% during that same time frame. This is another way of looking at it, and there you see 2 primary areas where the greenhouse gas emissions come from: transportation and the building sector. We started out our baseline in 2007 at 12.9, and our measurement is in metric tons of CO2 equivalent per capita per year, and it's driven down to 9.1 in our 2016 greenhouse gas emissions inventory. And so we are making steady progress, even though there have been a growth in the number of residents, the number of workers, and the number of housing units in Arlington. And so the grid has gotten cleaner, but the transportation sector has contributed by energy use declining 13% in that sector, as well as buildings becoming more energy efficient to the tune of 11% drop in that energy use. And so this is a breakdown showing you quickly at a glance where the energy is being used. In the buildings, it's just under 60% of our greenhouse gas emissions for the entire community. Transportation sector contributes 36%, and for our county government activities, we are staying right at 4%, which is the same as where we were back in 2013. This is a very timely update. There's been a lot of change during the last 5 years in the energy sector, in that marketplace, as well as activities at the state level, as well as the international level. You notice there are reports from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, painting a rather bleak picture, and a lot of the feedback we've received over the last year as we've gone out to various groups is that it's imperative that we act sooner rather than later in terms of addressing climate change issues. As far as the community engagement, we've had some major forums. November of last year over at George Mason University, we had 80 representatives from the community who knew about the community energy plan and are knowledgeable about the energy sector came and participated in that forum. And then we had a couple of other follow-up forums at the end of May and the beginning of June of this year. In addition to those forums, we've also met together with the E2C2, the Energy Committee part of E2C2, as well as working together with consultants to do an updated greenhouse gas emissions inventory, energy model, and conducting market research to make sure that we are kept apprised and staying ahead of the game in terms of those changes in the energy sector. We've drafted the community energy plan update. It went live May 24th, and then since then we've had a June 25th County Board work session earlier this week and gotten additional guidance that I'll talk about in a few moments that have continued to update the community energy plan. In addition to the community feedback, we've also reached out to our colleagues within multiple agencies throughout Arlington County, including our transportation staff, to ensure that we are in concert with the various initiatives happening across multiple departments. In terms of the feedback, this is some of the feedback we've received, and we used a tool that allowed people to vote in real time during the forum, both in November as well as at the end of May. So they used their smartphones. We posed questions to them, and we picked out a couple that seemed to highlight the overarching sentiment as to what we should be doing with this community energy plan. Number one, make the community energy plan bolder, faster, brighter. In addition to that, over 63% of the participants at the forum said the most effective way to increase the use of clean energy is through the use of incentives and financing. And then in addition to that, from a willingness to pay standpoint, 62% of the people in the room said they'd be willing to pay at least 5% more for the energy to achieve those various goals. Those sentiments were echoed throughout later forums in May as well as in June. And in addition to that, you see some of the concepts brought out in transportation, enhancing electric vehicles, and also interest in electric buses throughout the community. So with our overarching big ticket updates to the community energy plan, we had a 2050 goal of 3 metric tons per capita per year as our 2050 goal. Due to the guidance from the county board, that has now been changed to net zero, meaning 0 metric tons when it's all said and done, or carbon neutral by the year 2050. In addition to that, we've made our buildings goals more simplified and easier to understand. Renewable energy, it's looking outside the county for contractual agreements to enhance solar PV installation outside the county, while at the same time cleaning our grid for residents of Arlington. We talked about resiliency being a new chapter, and then last but not least, the electrification of the transportation sector is something that we're keeping an eye on and trying to make sure that we are set up to take advantage of it full sail. In terms of the progress, the top line in this graphic shows the line that we drew in our 2013 plan from our baseline year all the way out to 2050, gradually dropping down to 3 metric tons. We're updating this graph, as you note there by the asterisk. We haven't had time to update the model, but we are working to update the model to show how we will get to carbon neutrality by the year 2050. A breakdown of how it will, the various things that will contribute to us reaching our goal. The top line, the dashed line, is business as usual. It is recognizing there will be growth throughout the county. There will be an increase in housing, in jobs, housing units, and population. In addition to that, we want to get down to zero, and so we're saying the grid, through on-the-books reductions as well as proposed changes to the grid, will drop us over 30% of the way toward our goal. In addition to that, renewable energy, both in Arlington as well as outside Arlington, through those contractual agreements I mentioned, will contribute just under 10%. The buildings becoming more energy efficient. And then last but not least, the yellow wedge shows the increase in efficiency in the transportation sector, helping us reach down, all the way down to about 1 metric ton. And then that final wedge there, the hatched area, is a mix of a variety of things that can happen, whether it's disruption of a number of different technology advancements or using carbon offsets. As of right now, it is an aspirational goal as we reach to carbon neutrality by the year 2050. This is just to note that there's a lot of variables in play between now and the year 2050, and we have mapped out a scenario through our energy modeling to get us there, but we also recognize that we don't necessarily are able to forecast precisely throughout those years. So if the grid doesn't get quite as clean as we anticipate that it will, that puts a bit more pressure on the building sector or the renewable energy sector or the transportation sector to help contribute to get us to our goals. So for the county work session, we asked for guidance on 3 primary areas. First of all, we went to the board recognizing 1 metric ton was a realistic yet still ambitious goal to reach, but we also wanted to recognize the community was clamoring for 0 metric tons or net zero or carbon neutrality. In addition to that, the second question was regarding renewable electricity. And to what extent should we put more emphasis on renewable electricity goals, both for county government operations and for the community? And last but not least, we recognize the challenges in doing these various things. We didn't want people to be left behind as we strive to achieve our goals, and how do we address energy equity throughout this whole process. And so with renewable electricity, there are many different ways in which we can go ahead and reach our goals. They are listed there. I won't belabor the point, but there are many different avenues and different ways in which it can be done. As for the targets, these are new proposed targets that are in an update that is forthcoming for that request to advertise report. For county government, we're striving to become 50% renewable electricity by the year 2022, and then increase that to 100% renewable electricity by the year 2025. In terms of the vast majority of ways in which we can go ahead and do that, the vast majority will be through those off-site renewable energy contracts to the tune of 50 megawatts of power purchase agreements, contributing to 84% of our share of getting to that 2025 goal of 100% renewable electricity for county government operations. As for the community, this mirrors an initiative set forth by the Sierra Club, and that's 100% renewable electricity for the entire community by the year 2035. How we get there, it's a bit more complicated than for county government, but it's still something that we recognize is possible. The grid gets cleaner to the tune of 1/3 of the grid. The source is renewable energy. In addition to that, we increase the amount of on-site renewable electricity by 100 megawatts by the year 2035. Those contractual agreements for off-site renewable energy, and then also a mix of tariffs and something called renewable energy credits can be purchased in order to reach our 100% renewable electricity goal. For energy equity, this is the definition that we currently have in the draft. This is in coordination with our Department of Human Services, and it's recognizing that, yes, economics play a role, as do energy security and the environment, but we want to make sure that folks from all socioeconomic and racial and ethnic groups are able to take advantage of the various initiatives, whether it's electric vehicles, solar PV, or other initiatives helping us to reach our goals. We don't want anyone to be left behind. So this is the rest of the process. Again, this has been over a year in the making, with a variety of discussions happening throughout many different meetings. We're going to continue to go to various commissions and to community groups to talk about the changes to the community energy plan. The board report goes in July for the request to advertise for action in September. In addition to action on the community energy plan update, there's also a green building incentive policy that is one of our near-term implementation items, and that will come forward to the board at the same time. And then last but not least, we do have a variety of tools that are listed in our implementation framework, and in that implementation framework, we're envisioning, once we get clear guidance from the board through adoption of renewed and updated policies, we would update that community energy plan framework accordingly in order to go ahead and find out how we're going to reach our goals moving forward. Before I entertain questions, I want to highlight in the transportation sector, there was one policy that mapped out milestones of how we reduce our greenhouse gas emissions over time. That was one policy in that goal area. We still have that with updated targets all the way down to 0.5 metric ton by the year 2050. We also added 2 other policies. Policy 4.2 is to give priority to the reduction of vehicle miles traveled and increase use of alternative and public transportation. And a second policy is to coordinate with internal and external partners to track developments in EV or electric vehicle and charging infrastructure to produce a blueprint for a high-performance, cost-effective transition away from internal combustion engine vehicles. So with that, I'm happy to entertain any and all questions. Thank you very much for your time.
Commissioner Clement.
Yes, I believe I saw an earlier document from AIR or some other similar organization that indicated that the primary source of carbon emissions reduction in the county over the past 5 years has been the use of frack gas instead of coal. Is that a true statement?
What we've been able to do is reach that 24% emissions reduction level through those means that are listed there. The grid has gotten cleaner, and so Dominion Energy has taken coal plants offline and replaced them with higher efficiency natural gas power plants. But then in addition to that, locally, we have been able to affect change by making the buildings, or I should say the community has made buildings more energy efficient, as well as the transportation sector has had an input in terms of reducing vehicle miles traveled and more efficient use of transportation uses.
Commissioner Uri.
Thank you for the presentation. I find the goals very laudable, and I really do applaud you all for coming up with that. One question I do have, while reading through the draft document, I don't really find, or I didn't really see an explicit connection between land use policy and carbon emissions. Why is that?
We recognize, as we noted earlier in the presentation, the importance of effective land use and transportation, both in planning and implementation of those plans. And in fact, over the implementation last 5 years, we have actively integrated sustainability policies into master plans in Crystal City, in Roslyn, and elsewhere. We also note in the county government section of our community energy plan the need to integrate fully all of the community energy plan goals into all activities of the government. So we heard from, when we presented this at LRPC, the need to go ahead and fully and more robustly accentuate the linkage between land use and energy use. And so we recognize that as a need, and we welcome you to go ahead and look at, when it becomes live, the renewed and updated community energy plan update when it goes forward with that request to advertise report. And we hope we hit the mark, but if we didn't, we'll be back with more discussions before September.
Thank you. I guess what I am looking for is the explicit connection between the fact that one way we can get people to use more sustainable forms of transportation is by building more homes in places where there are high-frequency methods of transportation, like metro rail buses. I feel like that sometimes that connection isn't always made very clear.
Very good. Thank you for the comment. I'll make sure we incorporate that.
Anybody else? All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Dooley.
Thank you.
The next item is item 4, the Verizon site plan. It's on 11th Street South. I'll turn it over to the applicant for an overview.
And we'll be just a second loading up our presentation. Sorry. thanks for your patience with that. Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. My name is Kendrick Whitmore. I'm with Venable, and I represent Elcor, the applicant in this matter. The item before you this evening is an information item for a site plan filed for 411th Street, also known as the Verizon site. So on the next slide, you'll see some of the neighborhood context. You can see the site is outlined in red. To the north is the existing Altair building that is also owned by the applicant. It is now complete and leasing up. To the east is the Lennox Club and some apartments and some additional surface parking. And to the south is 12th Street South. And to the west is the Teardrop parcel and South Eads Street. You'll also see on the other side of South Eads Street is the Penn Place site to be developed. And then catty corner to the southwest of this site is the Bartlett that contains the Whole Foods in the area. So if we'll move to the next slide, you'll see a little more focused view of the development site. As you can see, there is no access currently directly from South Eads Street. One must go on 11th Street South and then loop back around into the surface parking lot. And there is a significant amount of surface parking, both for the vehicle storage for the existing Verizon use and a license agreement with the neighbor that has since been terminated. So a lot of parking on this site currently. So if we'll take a look at the next slide, I want to take a little bit of time walking through this. I realize this is a busy slide, but if you take a look at the yellow dash, the red dashed line, those are the boundaries of the parcel. And you can see that to begin with, this is a very narrow parcel. There is not a lot of room to maneuver east-west here. So the developer has had to work very hard, and the architect has had to work very hard to design the site in a way that works within those physical boundaries. A few other things to note are the site access. And just as there is no site access except from 11th Street down to loop down south today, that's going to continue in the future. 12th Street South, of course, is recommended to be part of the transit way, and we have a very nice walkable retail environment there that we wouldn't want to interrupt in any event, so there can be no curb cuts there. As you can see, to the west of the site is a county-owned property. It's a portion of what's been known as the Teardrop parcel. That area will not be suitable for a curb cut, particularly because of those bike lanes that are running along Eads Street. So a pretty significant constraints in terms of access. We really only have a single option in order to do that. The other constraint to mention are utilities. This site is really heavily burdened with utilities. The Teardrop parcel portion is pretty much full of utilities serving the local area. There is also a utility easement on the east side of the site. It's not shown here, but that is why we're pushed back from the property line on the east side. And then you can see even 11th Street South has got some significant utilities here. So we're bounded basically on every side by utilities. And the last constraint that I want to mention is with respect to Verizon. The sale of this property was conditioned on several things. One of them was the existing Verizon building, you can see there, the gray box, had to remain. So that is a fixed point that we cannot touch, cannot move on this site, that to a large extent drives the design of the site. The second constraint from Verizon, it's difficult to see here, and we'll talk about it a little more when we get to the loading, but if you take a look on the northeastern portion of the building, there are two loading spaces. Verizon demanded that there be space for 2 cherry picker trucks on this site, and fitting those in has been a challenge. The applicant's been able to do it, but it's been difficult. So I highlight that to put forward the fact that they are limited in design options as a result of a lot of these constraints. So if you move to the next slide, this is our plan again overlaid here. The proposal is for a multifamily residential building with 306 residential dwelling units, just under 11,000 square feet of ground floor retail, and below grade parking. Just to walk you around the site to give you some information and orientation, as you can see on the south side, there's a significant amount of retail. We're very excited about the activation of 12th Street, that we think this is going to help catalyze and really help play off a lot of that success at the Bartlett and elsewhere as we move farther west on 12th Street. As you go up Eads Street, that retail continues around the corner with the residential access pushed back there along Eads so that there's a full and active retail corridor before we get there. On the north side there on 11th Street, you can see there's a pickup and drop-off area that's for your Uber and your Lyfts. and then looping around to 11th Street and down that corridor, we've been able to consolidate basically all of the back of house functions to the back of house. There is loading. You can see there the Verizon trucks, the residential and retail loading, as well as access to the ramp down for the parking garage. So if we move to the next slide, a couple of street sections. I won't dwell on these except to let you know that they're consistent with the recommendations of the Crystal City Sector Plan, which applies here. So here we've got 12th Street. The next slide will go to Eads, I think, Eads, and then to 11th Street as we work around the building. Great. And so then for the next slide, want to give you kind of an overview of the transportation elements here. Really walkable site, walk score of 84. We're in very close proximity to both the Crystal City Metro Station and the Pentagon City Metro Station. There are also a significant number of bus routes here, 16 in the immediate area, and a really robust pedestrian and bicycle network nearby. To drill down on a couple more of these, on the next slide, you'll see a little more information on the transit facilities. Of those 16 bus routes, they're served by 9 bus stops within a quarter mile. Huge number in a close proximity. And then a little more information on the short walk to both of the metro stations. On the next slide, a little more information on the pedestrian facilities. I really like this slide because it shows you how many great destinations are within a very short walk from this site. Not only the metro access, but the ability to walk directly to a lot of these facilities. There are pretty good pedestrian facilities here today, but we are going to, with this project, build out the sidewalks along 12th Street and along 8th Street as well. So the next slide, we'll talk a little more to the bicycle facilities. We heard a lot earlier about the Army-Navy Complete Street that is in close proximity to this site, as well as a number of other areas with buffered and protected bike lanes. So we're very excited about the bicycle infrastructure here. And then the next slide will give you some information on the parking. The graphic here is an excerpt from the residential parking working group policy that was adopted. And as you can see, based on this site's proximity to Metro, we could go as low as a 0.4 under that policy. The applicant has taken a look at this. They think a 0.44 is the right number based on the market here. And that results in 134 parking spaces rather than the 122 minimum that would be required in a 0.4 scenario. And then on the next slide, a little more information on that parking. In addition to the 134 residential spaces, we do have the 10 visitor spaces as required by that residential parking policy. There is a visitor requirement, and we've met that. And then another concession from Verizon, they also wanted an additional 5 parking spaces. So we have those in addition to the 0.44 parking ratio there. So, and as I mentioned previously, parking access is off of 11th Street, and that there is that pickup drop-off area on 11th Street. So if we'll look at the next slide here, just a graphic showing about 2 and change levels for that below grade parking. Next slide. The pedestrian circulation. This is one we're very excited about. As I mentioned, some great retail presence along 12th Street, a lot of permeability there, and it does wrap the corner onto Eads Street. You'll see there the teardrop parcel, which I mentioned previously. That's that wedge-shaped piece outlined in blue. And as a result of that, there are kind of 2 pedestrian paths as you move north along Eads Street. We will be able to either take that outward western swing there to be right on Eads Street, or a path that really hugs the side of the building and is closer to that building. So the county owns that parcel. They are trying to make a determination as to what to do with it. It's certainly our hope that this would be publicly accessible open space, and we think there could be some really great synergies with the retail and the residential entrances playing off that open space there. So speaking of the residential, and you can see that that's going to have 2 entrances off of Eads Street north of the retail. So for the next slide, bicycle circulation, just kind of same old story here. We're coming off of 11th Street down that loading corridor. There's an entrance to the building for bicycles, as well as the ramp down to some of the bike parking. And we'll look at that in a little more detail here on the next slide, which shows the location of both the ground floor, the at-grade bicycle parking, and the below-grade protected bicycle parking. So this is the ground level in G1, and if we scoot to the next slide, we'll see G2 and G3, the location of those bike parking spaces. So next slide is the loading. I do want to take a little time and talk about this because this is really where the constraints that I mentioned earlier come into play. As I mentioned, we have a very narrow site along with a requirement to basically take 2 loading spaces and give them to Verizon. And we have worked very hard to design this loading in a way that does not impact the ground floor. We're very excited about the way the ground floor is going to operate, and taking chunks out of it with additional loading spaces makes it very difficult. Nevertheless, we've managed to put in 1 retail dedicated loading space and 1 residential dedicated loading space. This is something we're continuing to work with staff on, but this is where we are at this point. On the next slide, some more information on those loading spaces, the truck turns both for the retail, and then the next slide will show the residential. And if we move on to the next slide, our MMTA, the scope had 8 intersections being studied, and no additional mitigation was triggered by any of the capacity analysis. Everything was taken care of through on-site on-site design and our TDM package. So on the next slide, some of the trip generation numbers. I was really interested in the number of transit and walking trips as compared to auto here. Pretty interesting to see that we really are getting to that multimodal environment that we've seen for this part of Crystal City. And then finally, the last slide, this is our transportation management plan that's being proposed. It is what you are accustomed to seeing for projects of this type and size. So that's the entirety of our presentation. We'll be here for any questions, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Does staff have additional information to add?
Actually, no, staff has no presentation.
Okay, all right. Is there a staffer we can ask questions of, or no?
There is not.
Okay.
Certainly, a staffer will review this material this evening, so questions, can be sort of stated, and then we can follow up by email, or the commission could email sometime early next week.
All righty. Anybody have questions for the applicant? Commissioner Yeri? Oh, no, he's pointing at Commissioner Clement. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I'm pleased that the parking requirement has been substantially reduced. I think that is definitely consistent with the Crystal City Sector Plan. And so I am impressed with that, but I have a question. Does this development have anything to do with Amazon's coming to Crystal City, or was this in the works before that?
We were deemed the contract purchaser back in December of 2016, and we've been working on closing the deal on that for about 18 months, and we closed July 24th of 2018 ahead of Amazon's announcement. So,
Well, actually, you went a little too fast, and I'm not all familiar with this site. Could you explain give us a little more background about this project?
oh, yes, ma'am. So we were deemed the contract purchaser by Verizon.
And who is we?
Elcor.
Okay.
Elcor was deemed the contract purchaser. That was December of 2016. We had a lengthy due diligence process, and we closed on the land July of 2018.
So you purchased it from?
Verizon.
Okay,
Yes, ma'am.
I see. So essentially, this plan was in the works long before Amazon?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Commissioner Lantelmi?
Sort of a minor question, but the extra 5 spots that Verizon requires you to have, are those going to be surface parking or in the garage of the building? Because I saw the 2 cherry pickers are outside, but then you said there was an additional 5 spaces that they wanted?
Correct. The 5 spaces will be in the below-grade structure.
So it's within the building already? It's
Yes,
in
sir.
the building? Okay.
So you're currently showing a pickup and drop-off area along 11th in what is essentially the county teardrop parcel. Is that correct?
I'd have to see. I'm not sure whether it's in the teardrop parcel itself or in the 11th Street right-of-way. I'm not positive as to which,
Okay.
but certainly in one of those.
But not your frontage of 11th Street?
That's correct.
Okay. What is happening along your frontage of 11th Street that would preclude the pickup and drop-off from happening there?
Essentially, that is the only logical place where we could have Dominion Power's vaults below grade and not impact the public space. And so we have them service below grade underneath the sidewalk right there. And they have the tops to the vaults that you aren't allowed to have in public space or drive on top of, so they can be serviced at any point.
Gotcha. And I'm trying to remember, I feel like I remember from SPRC, the east side of the building near 12th Street, there's like a dining area to the east of the building, is that correct?
That's what the current plan shows, but it's open to flexibility since there's no retailer in as of right now.
Gotcha. And not to get too into the weeds here, but why couldn't the Dominion vaults be located over on that side of the building?
There's a 12-foot easement with Verizon that there's a very large concrete duct bank extending from their building to 12th that houses a slew of utilities. That essentially wraps the entire site and comes out around into the old southeast right of way.
Gotcha. So there's below ground issues.
Correct.
All right.
Correct.
Thank you. Any other commissioners? Commissioner Wadsworth.
Have you all already updated the Crystal City Citizens Review Council on the project?
I don't believe so.
No, I don't believe we've been in front of them. It's a great
Okay.
suggestion.
Yeah, that'd be something to do.
yeah.
We had a meeting last week, and there was a desire by the whole commission that there's a lot of excitement about all the development coming to the area, but all the individual projects have to be looked at in the context of all the other development that's going on, and to make sure we don't end up with little islands of projects that don't necessarily connect with one another. And the commission sent a letter to the county board last week expressing that sentiment. So that'd be something good to do.
Absolutely. Appreciate the suggestion. We will.
Sure.
Thank you.
So you said you had one loading bay for residential and one loading bay to serve the retail, is that correct?
Yes.
How confident are you that that is sufficient loading capacity for the number of residential units and the amount of retail envisioned?
We've worked with our property management team and we feel pretty confident, but as Ked mentioned earlier, we're still working with staff on figuring out the entire loading situation.
And if a delivery does come for retail to that retail loading bay, is there internal circulation that would actually get to all of the various retail in the building from the loading bay, or no?
The current plan does not suggest that, no.
Yeah, I know, it's very common. It's also, I feel like it causes issues everywhere. The retail deliveries don't want to go sit in the loading dock when they can just pull up and idle. And deliver across the sidewalk to the retail. All right, anything else? All right, we'll see you back after SPRC.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The commission's going to take about a 5-minute recess before the next
good.
item.
No, the applicant goes first. Dennis, what are you going to say? What do you say? At least you showed up.
I thought there was a new policy about showing up.
I came to honor you. More client than.
All right, I think we're sufficiently back. We can go ahead and get started.
The next item is item 5, the Roslyn Holiday Inn Site Plan Info, also known as 1900 North Fort Myer Drive. I'll turn it over to the applicant for an overview.
Good evening. Nicholas Cummings here with Walsh Colucci on behalf of the applicant. I'm going to give a brief background before Wells and Associates presents. The couple of you that were at SPRC know that we have kind of a fulsome presentation on transportation issues with this project because there are a few things that we know that you're going to be interested in, so we really want to address those. The application, of course, concerns the Roslyn Holiday Inn property, which has been owned and operated by the applicant since 1972. The property is located at the intersection of Lee Highway with North Fort Myer Drive and North Nash Street. We propose a total redevelopment of the site consistent with the Roslyn sector plan with a rezoning to CO Roslyn zoning district. The proposed development is a 766,182 square foot mixed-use building with an FAR of 9.7 and a maximum height of 38 stories. It contains 344 hotel rooms under a 4-star hotel flag, 500 residential units, 10,748 square foot high-quality restaurant serving 3 meals a day, 3,738 square feet of retail, and a 35,870 square foot conference facility, which can accommodate up to 1,875 people at one time at maximum capacity. Now, this conference facility is a significant and much-needed addition to Roslyn. This has been an important economic development goal of the county for many years, finally being realized with this project. This space includes meeting rooms, ballrooms, conference areas, event spaces, and party rooms. We expect substantial interest in this space with high occupancy rates. Providing sufficient parking for this use is a crucial element of this project that Wells will highlight in their presentation after they address some of the other issues I'm sure you're interested in as well. And without further ado, given the hour, I think it's time to turn it over to Wells and Associates.
Good evening, Commissioner Slatt, members of the commission. I'm Mike Warkowski. I'm with Wells and Associates. Appreciate the opportunity to present the 1900 North Fort Myer Drive project. We just wanted to start off with sort of the basics, site location, development summary and such. This first slide shows the site location, Lee Highway to the north, North Nash Street on the west, and North Fort Myer Drive on the east. This summarizes the program summary. So under the existing conditions, 307 hotel rooms, no residential units, 4,500 square feet of restaurant space, 15,000 of conference space, 400 parking spaces currently provided. Proposed conditions, redeveloping, going to the hotel, 360 rooms, 500 residential units, large restaurants, 10,748 square feet, 3,738 of retail space, and a conference center that was mentioned previously, 35,870. We have a total of 818 parking spaces that are proposed. This slide shows the existing site access points to the property. On the north side on Nash Street, on the northern end is the access to, which is 20th Street. There's 14 parking spaces in the parking lot. That leads to the parking garage that is below the hotel. Also along the west side of, south on Nash Street is the loading dock that you can see, and then further to the south is the other driveway to the parking garage. One access point on North Fort Myer Drive that pulls in front of the building. This is the proposed access scheme. So I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that it's oriented plan north to the right. for consistency. Along North Nash Street, the access to the parking garage for the residential building is on the northern end. And then further down to the south is the loading dock. It's adjacent to the Turnberry loading dock. And then on the on the east side on North Fort Myer, the northern driveway inbound only to the portico share for the hotel. Further to the south, a two-way driveway that leads to the below grade and the parking garage. So I'd like to walk through the street sections that we have. All of these street frontages will be upgraded with the site redevelopment, and will include upgrading the sidewalks and such. This shows the pedestrian circulation that's around the site. So along North Nash Street, a sidewalk, street trees and such. You can see where I mentioned previously the garage entry and the loading dock access. And then along Lee Highway, a public sidewalk widening there, and along North Fort Myer Drive. Also shown along Fort Myer is the sidewalk area, the cycle track, and the main access to the hotel. What's shown just to the northern portion of the site is the pedestrian pass-through that goes from North Nash to Fort Myer Drive. What you see, I'm sorry, if you could go back, John. What you see in the northwest corner, that blue area, that's where the sidewalk slope is greater than 5%. So it's an existing condition there, but we wanted to just point out that the ADA access would be through the pass-through that's shown just to the south of that. So this slide shows the portico share, and when we looked at this assignment and looked at the portico share, we thought about holistically how it would work and how it would need to manage day-to-day operations along with various events at the hotel, given the significance of the conference center. So what you see here is the entry that I mentioned along North Fort Myer on the northern portion of the site where you enter. It's a 27-foot wide passageway. Under this condition, this is sort of the typical day condition where there would be a drop-off, pickup. This area will be well managed. The parking will be valet parked, so at all times. So this will be highly managed through the events. You can see as to the south where you come through the portico share, that's the access to the parking garage coming back and down, and then coming back out to leave the garage. The other thing I would mention is you can see along the sidewalk, the intent is to, have a clear pedestrian access that takes you to the building, and also to alert persons walking along the sidewalk and cyclists along the cycle track by having a different pavement treatment there, so that they're aware that that they could be encountering pedestrians and such through that area. Go next. Oh, I'm sorry, okay. This one is the event day circulation. So we anticipate that there'll be some, a number of large events here. We took a look at what the queuing and storage requirements would be. This, as you can see, would hold about 10 to 12 vehicles. It really is a function of the valet service, and that service will have to manage those vehicles during these events. But we feel like this is about what's needed to ensure that we don't create traffic problems along Fort Myer Drive that can spill out to the north and reach Lee Highway. So now we can talk about the loading access. So the loading dock is located on North Nash Street on the southern portion of the building. It's adjacent to the Turnberry driveway, consistent with the Roslyn sector plan. What's shown on this slide are the various trucks that will use the loading facility. Trash truck, small box truck, which is an SU-25, an SU-40, which is a smaller sort of straight truck, if you will, box truck, and then a large WB-50, which is one of the tractor trailers. So these are the loading circulation movements that are from North Nash Street. And this shows the largest truck, so I would want to emphasize here that this is not only the largest truck, it only represents about 20% of all the trucks deliveries that will come to the building. The residential, the hotel, all the loading will be enclosed in the space here. So on the left-hand side, you can see how a truck would pull beyond the driveway, back into the loading area. The door would be closed and all the activity would be enclosed within that area. The driveway itself, so when we talked at SPRC, I mentioned that the driveway apron would need to be wider. And you can see on the drawing here, sort of, which is in the northwest or northeast corner of that, where that curb return is, the driveway is widened there, and that's to preserve the on-street parking that's on North Nash Street. So that driveway, the width of the driveway for a pedestrian along the sidewalk stays at 30 feet. That driveway apron, though, picks up another 10 or 11 feet, so it goes to about 46 feet or so, 45 feet. In order to preserve the parking and be able to accommodate large trucks, they would travel along North Nash Street, backing in and then continuing to the north, going out, as you can see on the right-hand side of the screen. So walking through the street sections, the first street section is North Nash Street. So on the north side, as I mentioned, 3 access points, consolidated to 2 driveways in the proposed section. So the corner would be, we would maintain the on-street parking. That would be along there, a 10-foot sidewalk along the frontage, much larger than the 4 feet that's out there today. And then the curb extensions that are planned along that route to reduce the crossing distance at Lee Highway. This is the existing proposed sections along eastbound Lee Highway. So the existing 3 eastbound travel lanes. Under the proposed, the sidewalk would be widened to 8 feet, maintain 3 travel lanes. There would be a slight shift in the curb there, but that helps pick up a 6-foot on-street bike lane in that area. Also, the removal of the channelized right turn lane at the corner, again, reduces crossing distance, creating safer situation for pedestrians. So this shows the North Fort Myer Drive section. So on the north side, travel lanes, parking lane that's in front of the site, 1 driveway that's there today. Under the proposed condition, go to 2 driveways, the northernmost inbound, southernmost 2-way, then a sidewalk 10 to 12 feet along the site frontage. Also the 8-foot cycle track along the site frontage, which will be elevated in that area so that vehicles will know what they're crossing as they drive in and out. Also, the 4 parking spaces would be maintained under these conditions. So what we're showing here is the ultimate condition, which is based on the Core of Roslyn study. This takes in the recommendations of going to a 2-way. So there's 3 southbound travel lanes that would be maintained. The cycle track, landscape buffer, and such, as I mentioned previously, would also be maintained. On the eastern side, one of the travel lanes would be converted to northbound, and we would pick up a 7-foot parking lane in that area. So I'd like to just run through the multimodal facilities. We know that this area is well served by transit. There are a number of facilities here. The walk scores are well above the 70s and 80s for walking and biking. So there are a number of transit routes as shown in the site here in the Metro Rail Station. Bicycle facilities exist around the site. Also, bicycle sharing station is on Lynn Street, very nearby. And with the Core of Roslyn plan, there's a set of bicycle facilities that are all interconnected that will really improve cycling in Roslyn. So now I'd like to talk about our multimodal traffic study that we prepared. We followed the typical Arlington County procedure through our scope of the study, intersections, build-out year and such. We studied 2023 as the build-out year. You can see here, these are the intersections. We had 9 intersections that we studied that generally includes from Nash Street over to Lynn Street and a number of those intersections. This slide compares the trip generation estimate. So on the existing conditions, the hotel conference space today estimated to generate 70 AM trips and 78 PM trips. All the components under the proposed conditions, the residential units, conference, hotel space, retail, those total trips, 260 AM, 317 PM. The net new trips, 190 AM trips and 239 PM trips. What I would like to include is that these trip generation estimates account for the non-auto mode share that's expected to occur given the location of the hotel. As was discussed at one of the SPRC meetings, there was a question about how the traffic was assigned to the road network. So given the way the driveways are today, we counted the traffic at the driveways. Then we basically removed that traffic from the network. And then we added on the traffic estimates as shown in the previous slide to reflect the location of the driveways as you see them here. So on the west side on Nash Street, those volumes that you see, the first one is the AM peak hour volume. The second one is the PM peak hour volume. All of the residential traffic was essentially reassigned to that driveway on Nash Street. The hotel, conference traffic and such was all assigned to North Fort Myer Drive. A portion of it assumed to use the portico share and then the balance at the driveway that leads directly to the garage. As you can see here, about a third of the traffic on Nash Street is destined to go to and from the south. The balance, about 70% to and from the north to get to Route 29, Lee Highway, and other routes in between. So here's a summary of the traffic multimodal study. Again, we looked at 9 intersections. We went through the typical scoping process. We looked at 2023 build-out conditions. And so under the future conditions, all of the intersections, all the signalized intersections would essentially continue to operate at acceptable levels of service. John, if you could go to the next slide that shows the intersections. So this shows the comparison of the intersections. So in the blue is without the redevelopment, so it's in future conditions, but assuming no change in development. The orange color is the future with development, so the additional traffic, if you will, that would be generated by the hotel residential units and such. Knowing and understanding what we're showing here is really isolating the impacts of the site itself. So these are all of the signalized intersections. The intersection of Fort Myer and eastbound Lee Highway, that intersection operates at E in the morning, as you can see there. The additional traffic would tip that over to F because it's on sort of the border of those levels of service. What this really shows is where we have a change in level of service, the impact is generally 6 seconds or so. So up to the north along Lee Highway, where we have a change in level of service, it's about 4 seconds due to the site-generated traffic. The other one about 6 seconds, and about a second as you go down Fort Myer Drive. It's also important to note that although some of these intersections along Lee Highway show overall acceptable levels of service, we all know that the peak hour, peak direction there is really the constraint. So along eastbound Lee Highway in the morning, there's queuing between those intersections for through traffic, just as there is in the westbound direction. But this gives you the relative difference in what the site's impact is on the network itself. Okay, so now we'd like to talk about the parking. So the parking supply, as I mentioned previously, 818 spaces. They'll be in 2 garages. I'll run through some of the on-street parking, then the on-site parking, and then the garage and operations and such. So this shows the parking along the frontages. You can see that on the left side of the screen, the existing parking along North Nash Street, Fort Myer Drive, 11 spaces. We actually pick up 1 space with the redevelopment on the proposed side. As was mentioned in the SPRC meeting, this does not account for the spaces that go away with 20th Street being redeveloped. So there's 14 spaces in that lot that would go away with the redevelopment. So this table provides a static parking calculation of the number of spaces under the ordinance, what we're proposing, and a comparison of the two. So residential, 500 residential units, the maximum end of the zoning ordinance at 1 per unit, 500 spaces. Proposed is 0.698 per unit, 349 spaces, and then the difference or the reduction of 30%. Looking at the hotel, 360 rooms, 0.7 spaces per room, 252 spaces. Our proposal of 0.5 spaces per room or 180 spaces, difference of 31%. The retail restaurant space under the ordinance, we've combined that space and made the adjustment for 1 per 1,000 over 5,000, so 9 spaces required. Well, we broke it up under our conditions, so we're providing 6 spaces at 1 per 530 for the retail. This relates to the some of the wording in the CO Roslyn language to provide some convenient parking, basically for employees. And then the restaurant space, which is combined under the zoning ordinance calculation, we broke it out for purposes of our calculation, 1 per 6 seats, so 32 parking spaces. So where that gets us to is a subtotal, 761 spaces under the ordinance. Our proposal, 567 spaces. The difference is about 24%. What you see below here is the conference and assembly space. So there was discussion about this at the SPRC, how this would be calculated, is it included, and how it works. We've simply showed this calculation if it were developed independently, so we'd have a sense of what the difference in parking would be. So 1,875 attendees, this would be the maximum occupancy of the space. At 1 per 3 seats would be 625 spaces. The balance of parking provided for the project. So of the 818 spaces, we have 349 for the residential, so 469 spaces for essentially all the other uses. When we remove the hotel, retail, and restaurant space, we're at 251 spaces, which equates to about 1 per 7.5 seats. And then the difference there, is more than double, so it's about 60%. So the overall totals are about 1,386 spaces versus 818 spaces, or about 40%. What you see below on the bottom part of the table is the split of the parking, as I mentioned previously. Residential, 349 spaces. Those do include visitor parking, and they will be segregated from the balance of the parking, which is the 469 spaces. Also, what's shown are the bicycle parking. So 236 Class 1 bicycle parking spaces and 19 Class 3 bicycle parking spaces. We have a number of bicycle parking that's around the site, and we can go back to those if necessary. So I wanted to talk about our shared parking analysis, and I think, as we've talked about, our goal is to, provide the right amount of parking. We obviously do not want to build more parking than is required. We want to make sure that we provide enough parking that fits the site, its use, its intended use, and will make it successful. Given the complexities of the conference center component, as we looked at this assignment, we said, well, you know, this is such a different component than sort of a typical kind of limited service hotel, where we know we're going to have surges in activity. We started off by looking at how that space would work, the 1,875 conference space area, if you will. The way our approach was to sort of take this in components. So we focused on the hotel guests, the restaurant patrons, and then the conference space. And we assumed, you know, the standard hotel for the use. We assumed a high-end restaurant that would, you know, 3 meals a day that was mentioned previously, and then the conference attendees. And so as we looked at the conference attendees, we said, well, how does this space really work? Because the 1875 isn't practical. That would fill all the space. Where we came to is 4 different events, 4 different conditions that we would look at the hotel. And we would look at those for you know, weekday and weekend conditions, essentially for all the hours of the day between 6 a.m. and midnight. We established our baseline rates for the hotel, the restaurant, and the conference space. So the hotel, the baseline rate was 0.7 per room. That's from the ordinance. The restaurant space, we used the rates that were published by ITE, the Institute of Transportation Engineers, and the Parking Generation Manual as our baseline condition. And then for the conference center space, we looked at each one of those conditions and we made adjustments for non-auto mode share, persons arriving by taxi, metro rail, Uber, Lyfts, what have you, persons staying at the hotel, persons coming from adjacent buildings, and we looked at that through all the hours of the day for various events. So just to go back to the hotel for a second, our non-auto mode share for the hotel, we assumed a 50% across the board non-auto mode share for all the hours of the day. For the restaurant space, again, this space peaks more at lunchtime and then in the evening. That varied from about 30% on a weekday to less 15% on a weekend when transit service is less viable and we expect more drivers to occur. The conference center space really varies by the event because different events, we expect different situations for conference attendees. And we also looked at a wedding, which I'll get to as we go through it. So John, can we go to the next one? So this is the first condition we looked at. This is a weekday morning event at the hotel, and this has 800 attendees. Again, you could see if you look at the bottom, the blue portion of the chart, that's the hotel parking demand throughout the day. So from 6 a.m. to midnight, you can see how there's a dip in that demand throughout the day. The green is the restaurant space. So there's an increase during the middle of the day, 12, 1, 2 p.m., drops back down, and then comes back up in the evening, 7 or 8 p.m. The conference space, this event was, again, between 8 and noon. So what we did is we layered on, you can see the demands here that we've layered on, and this gives us the peak. So the peak condition is at 11 a.m. when we have a need for 569 spaces, which is 100 more spaces than is provided in the garage. So a couple things to quantify here. One is, again, these are peak events. We know that there will be many of them, but there will certainly be other events that have a lower parking demand. We also know that some of this demand can be made up by valet parking, where we could pick up maybe 50 spaces within the garage or so, but also through other off-site parking and other increases that will naturally occur as attendees learn and maybe take other modes rather than driving and parking at the hotel. Go to the next one, please. So this second event is actually 990 patrons. It assumes 2 spaces within the hotel, one space with 600 patrons, and a second space with 360 patrons. And it's an event from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. This is more like a typical all-day conference. So as you can see, again, you have the hotel on the bottom, the restaurant space, the green in the center, and then the conference attendees that come in the morning. They're there throughout the day, and then as that conference ends at 5 p.m., it begins to drop off. There's essentially a balance here. We're showing a 17-space shortage under this condition. But again, under this condition, the non-auto mode share goes up to about 40%. There's a draw from patrons that stay in the hotel. So we're accounting for those kinds of things, looking at what we think the inherent parking demand would be. The third condition is the weekday evening event. So this is the most intense of all the events. Again, this is an 800-person event. You can see the demand picks up in the middle of the day, but it peaks in the evening for the conference center space. This would be one of your, Friday night events where you could see hotel patrons are coming back to the hotel. The restaurant is hitting its peak at 8 p.m. And when those two overlap with the conference attendees, that's where the maximum occurs. This we're projecting at 8 p.m. in the evening. The difference there, a deficit of 186 spaces. Again, some of that can be made up on the site itself. Some of that would be made off in off-site parking. Some of that would be made up by others, moving into other modes. The last event is the weekend condition. And so this is a weekend, sort of a typical wedding on a weekend. So the hotel and the restaurant space, again, the curves are slightly different, but the overall is the same. The restaurant space, you can see, is higher here because it's a Saturday, so we expect there to be more activity at the restaurant. This has an 800-person wedding that would be, have attendees and then the reception in the evening. This is lower than the previous one because, again, you can see that a wedding has more people staying at the hotel. So, with that number of people staying at the hotel, the overall demand comes down. So with these, you can see that's why we sort of broke these up into these various conditions, because as we started looking at how the conference space would be used, we realized that we needed to look at it in various conditions over time to determine, what the inherent demand would be, how that demand could be managed, and then what can be provided on the site that's a reasonable amount of parking. Again, with our goal being provide the right amount of parking, not to overpark the site, but make sure that we have something that's viable and workable into the future. So this is just a summary of the 4 conditions that I just mentioned. The weekday, 3 of those are weekday conditions: a morning event, a midday or all-day event, an evening event, and then a weekend evening event, showing the deficits that we were calculating along for each one of those conditions to be made up in other means. So the next portion is just the Transportation Demand Management Plan. These are all elements that I'm sure you're familiar with. These are typical for this type of project. Funding, facilities, carpool, vanpool, what have you. I think, again, we have a robust network here. We have, plenty of non-auto facilities that helps reduce peak hour trips. But I think as one of the discussions we had at SPRC is, we have 500 residential units. Why do we only have 110 peak hour trips? Most people, they may own a car, but they don't drive it to work. They don't drive it during the peak hour, but we still need parking for them. So that's, I think, those speak to how we'll have a reduction in the peak hour trips, but also being able to serve the uses that are necessary. I'll be available for questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Does staff have presentation as well?
Good evening. I'm Dennis Sellen with the Department of Environmental Services Transportation Division. I do have a few slides to discuss some of the issues that DES has identified with the project. This project has already been through 3 SPRC meetings, and fortunately, we do have 2 of our commissioners who've been present at those meetings and are aware of the issues. The applicant, I believe, was also intending to bring this project to the board at this point in September. A couple of sort of overriding or issues is that the project it's a rezone to CO Roslyn. There's a combination of, let me go back one. So there's a site, there is a street vacation, and then there is a parcel that's currently a VDOT parcel that is to be conveyed as part of the project. So there's a rezone, the vacation, and then, of course, this is a major site plan amendment, which the applicant has already covered. Typically, the county staff looks at the overriding policies, and here we have 2 major documents that we typically look at. And those are, of course, our master transportation plan. And in this case, we have a recently completed Roslyn sector plan. So here I've just pulled out a couple of the overriding policies that we have used to guide us in the review of the Ditmar project. And those are the design and operation of complete streets and the accommodation of travel growth through shifts to non-automobile modes and improve management of the existing streets. I will not read all of the verbiage there, but I think those are kind of some of the underlying principles that we have used. And then with respect to parking, ensure minimum parking needs are met and excessive parking is not built, and then to allow for reduced parking space requirements for new development. And I think you are all aware that over the past several years, we have taken some very specific both policy and guidance with respect to reduced parking for both commercial and residential projects. With respect to the sector plan, I think you're probably very aware that the Roslyn sector plan envisions a very sort of multimodal future, and many of the policies, the guidance, the principles, the vision, all speak to that, and then some of the actions that are the outcomes of that also look at that. There is a vision to new 18th Street, which is to be a public or a pedestrian-oriented street, and much of the verbiage in the sector plan talks about a walkable Roslyn, a multimodal Roslyn, and so I just want to pull out and share with you some of those things that really speak to the vision of what Roslyn is to be in the 21st century. So to be a walkable neighborhood, connecting people with community and choices. And when we get to some of the specifics, and especially some of those things that affect this project in this site, is to transform North Fort Myer Drive and Lynn Street into places bringing the Roslyn community and region around retail arts, welcoming public spaces, expanded transit and walking connections, to transform the pedestrian and bicycle network into a safer, more attractive, more accessible place to walk and to bike, to improve the walking experience with wider sidewalks, new walkway connections, strategies to reduce topographic barriers, safer street crossings, enhancement of streetscape aesthetics, And then we get to some of the parking recommendations with respect to off-street and on-street parking. I've highlighted several of those that are particularly pertinent to this project to discourage above-grade parking, but we're permitted to apply standards for wrapping, and then for off-street parking to encourage use of high-capacity and high-capacity vehicle storage technologies. We also have some of the urban design policies and recommendations that are applicable to this as well. And one of the outgrowths of the Roslyn Sector Plan has been the Core of Roslyn Transportation Study, and that has been underway for the past 2 years. And it was either last week or the week before, the team presented its preferred alternative. And I guess I would describe this as having several components in this project, and that will basically be it's two key streets. It is Fort Myer Drive and Lynn Street, and those are going to be multimodal streets that are going to be connecting the trails at the northern and southern ends of Roslyn that are currently not connected, and making those north-south connections safe and pleasant places for pedestrians and cyclists. And the major components of the preferred alternative include filling in or removal of the Fort Myer Drive tunnel and the incremental conversion of Fort Myer Drive to a two-way street. And the preferred alternative emphasizes enhancing the pedestrian and bicycling networks within the core, including a wider sidewalk, continuous protected bicycle facilities on Fort Myer Drive, North Lynn Street, and Wilson Boulevard. Changes at the southern tip of Roslyn, a reconfiguration of Route 50 and Meade Street. And while this is a 2030 preferred alternative, our staff does plan to do some tactical one-way cycle tracks on both Fort Myer and Lynn Street as soon as next summer. So this is really a direct outgrowth of the Roslyn Sector Plan that we will actually be seeing some on-the-ground treatments as early as next summer. And as you see from the applicant's presentation, the integration of the cycle track on Fort Myer Drive as part of that project. With respect to the analysis that the applicant has done for the multimodal transportation analysis, we do have some outstanding concerns with respect to some of the scenarios that they've outlined, and those are specifically dealing with the conference center. We have asked the applicant to look at some and present some comparable analyses for other conference centers. The issue for us is that the conference center is not a standard land use as recognized by ITE, and therefore we are unable to validate some of their assumptions and estimates. And it's especially regarding the parking. And so right now, we don't have a way to analyze their parking numbers and to validate those numbers. And so that is still an open question. We understand that the applicant is developing those comps, and we'll have them to us shortly. So that is we feel it's still an outstanding issue that is being discussed and negotiated. But we still do have questions and concerns with respect to the parking. County guidelines and requirements and policies for parking for the hotel and retail. I think there's a couple of things about the parking. One, we believe that it's going to directly affect both the mode share, and it also affects the building bulk and mass. So it has both a transportation and an urban design component. While there is a 0.7 CO Roslyn requirement for the hotel rooms, we typically have accepted about a 0.5 for hotel. So from 241 spaces, we would consider possibly 172 spaces for that. There has also been discussion about the conference space, the use of the one space for 3 seats with the public assembly space standard that the applicant has referenced. Our zoning administrator has specifically stated that that standard does not apply to conference spaces in a hotel. So that is why this issue about the conference center in a hotel is outstanding. They are perhaps using it as some sort of a guidepost, but it is not to be confused with an actual requirement for assembly space in a hotel. The number of spaces that they are proposing, it may be appropriate if that justification is provided, but we have not yet seen that. And the issue is that we do think that there is a direct relationship between the amount of parking that's being provided and the building base, which I will get to in the next slide. There's also a relationship between the amount of parking that's being provided for retail and what the amount of parking that could be provided, or the fewer amounts of parking that could be provided because of the distance to the metro station. So again, we think that there's some advantages because of the location of this project in the center of Roslyn that the applicant should be taking advantage of and isn't. Under some of the new residential parking guidance, we would consider, it's actually 0.4, which we would actually consider reducing to 0.2 if the applicant did additional bicycle parking and/or TDM. So that means that for 500 units, they could go as low as 100 parking spaces with an additional 25 spaces for visitor parking. So that is 125 spaces. I haven't really done the math on this, but it would be significantly lower than the 818 spaces that the applicant is proposing. And you can do the math, but it's smaller. So we get to this issue, and it does have to do with, and here we're seeing the building's base. And so, under the sector plan, there is a recognition that buildings have a base, a tower, and a top. And here we're seeing the base, and there is 3 to 6 stories recommended, and the applicant has a 10-story base. And a lot of that base is their garage. So the issue here is directly affecting the architecture, which I know is not transportation, but it's because of what we believe is an excessive amount of parking in this site, which they may be able to justify, but we do believe that there are policies, there are guidance, and particularly given the location in the center of Roslyn, we believe that a lower number of parking spaces could be and should be provided in this facility. And we think that the applicant needs to do a lot more to address some of the sector plan recommendations. I have a couple of other things to say, particularly about some of the pedestrian circulation and safety. As we know that the Port Cochere is an integral part of the project. However, it does have an impact on the pedestrian experience. This is the JW Marriott downtown on 14th and between E and F, I think. And one of the things that happens when you have this kind of a facility, and especially this one, which is kind of replicates, and to some degree, what the applicant is proposing, is that once you begin sort of subsuming your architecture kind of takes over the Port Cochere. And so the relationship between the street and the building face is sort of gone. And so the ability of a pedestrian to be able to relate to the street front is, that opportunity is missing. And I think that that's one of the things in terms of the pedestrian environment. The pedestrians are going to be far outside of any ability to relate to any sort of retail environment, windows, doors, and all they will be seeing is basically a vehicular-dominated environment here. And I think that for the Roslyn Sector Plan, we see that as a loss. Granted, as I said, we recognize the need and the utility for the Port Cochere, for this hotel to function properly, but I think that some additional design work needs to be done. I'm not sure what that is. I think there's also some potential for conflicts here between the two entries and exits and pedestrians and certainly cyclists here. We also, I'm not going to argue this one as extensively, but there was a recommendation in the sector plan for the building lot line on Lee Highway to come all the way to to create a continuous street wall along Lee Highway. And that was part of the reason why we advocated for the conveyance of that parcel, the VDOT parcel, to be able to take advantage of that opportunity and to provide some ground level activity along Lee Highway. And there's only sort of a partial response to that as well. And so I think that that's another sort of lost opportunity for pedestrian experience as well. And I am going to conclude my remarks there. And I think both myself and the applicant representatives are available for any questions.
All right, thank you very much. That was a lot of presentation. Lots of good detail. Anybody in the commission want to kick off? Commissioner Clement.
Yes, there was a lot of comment about this project at the board meeting on June 15th. This was at public comment. There were something like, I don't know, a half a dozen different individuals, most of whom were residents of Turnberry Towers, who were alarmed at the scope of this development. And I believe that you will, unless this project is modified to reduce the parking requirement as suggested or recommended by staff, there's going to be some very serious community opposition. Thank you.
I was wondering if we can get the applicant's presentation back up and go back to some of those event parking scenarios. I think scenario 3 is the one I want to go back to. I think that was the one with the greatest deficit of parking spaces. Yeah, great, thank you. All right, so this is an 800-person event, is that correct? Yes, okay. So just looking at the yellow is the conference center. These stacked graphs are always tough to read precisely, but it looks like probably 150 parking spaces are the other uses, the hotel and the restaurant. So that means like 500 spaces are being allotted to the conference center, approximately.
You good? It's, let's see, for that one, it's 480 actually. 78 for the restaurant and 97 for the hotel.
Yeah.
At that hour.
So I know staff, you're hopefully preparing some comps from another conference center, and staff will be able to do some more analysis and on this, but like expecting almost 500 parking spaces to be needed for an 800-person event on top of a metro station on a weekday evening, like just seems suspicious to me on the face, especially given how many people are likely to be staying not only just in this hotel, but perhaps in a nearby hotel, let alone just being in the region. So I hope that there will be some more analysis and backup or just fewer parking spaces the next time we see this.
I would just point out, if I could just
Please.
for a second, I would just point out though that, again, the purpose was for the peak event under certain conditions. So even though we're using the 800-person event, the hotel has sort of various locations within it. And so some may be higher or lower, but the purpose of having these various conditions was to see what that range would be, so that we would know, you know, a large portion of an event like this, you'd expect to either need to find other parking or would need to go into some other form to get there. So the purpose was to see sort of that unconstrained condition.
Other commissioner questions? Commissioner Lantelmi.
Through various other projects that have come up in the RB corridor, we've pretty much heard from staff consistently that other buildings are overparked, that there is slack up and down the corridor. Have you looked to see what the usage rate is for the buildings, for the parking surrounding this site? Because it strikes me that if those buildings, consistent with what we found in other parts of the corridor, have spaces going empty, this, you know, why build more here when people could cross the street and park in spaces that are already available?
I understand what you're saying. We haven't done that. Presumably, you know, again, what you see here, that inherent portion of that demand needs to go somewhere. If that portion is driving, some of that would go into public parking, but there is not a whole lot of other public parking in close proximity in Roslyn. There is other parking, you know, there is curb parking and those kinds of things that would also be used, but we haven't specifically gone to other buildings and determined whether or not those spaces are available.
Well, I think that would be useful information for all of us to know whether there is in fact available parking in those other buildings.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Bryce.
Can I speak back just?
Of course.
Real quick? So when I hear that question, it lends me to think that there's an agreement that there's cars coming. It's just where do they park outside of our facility? We have heard, I've been on the Arlington Chamber GM Committee for 20 years. Arlington was very excited to bring a conference center to Arlington via transient tax dollars, which, by the way, was going to be very heavily parked because they knew parking was required. We are bringing this conference center to Arlington, which has been asked for, and we're delivering it. We're very unique in that we can. There's tax dollars and economic implications both for the region, for tourism, and for office space that never really gets brought up in these meetings for good reason. But parking and the competition to which we will be competing against to get business is a requirement. The parking that you're saying it's hard to believe, there are a lot of events. ISACA was at our property the other day, 400 parking spaces. The nighttime event, the realtors, the women's realtor annual meeting that night down the street, both of those could be housed in our building. But that will require 600 parking spaces. And you don't deliver this space without the ability to economically justify it, and parking is a part of it. That's why most developers don't bring it. It's very risky without the parking. So I just want to, the economics don't really get brought into it, but when we're questioning if the business exists, which I kind of hear, it's not suspicious. It's there. And the county wants it, and the tax dollars are there for the county when we have it. But it's real, but the parking is a requirement.
Commissioner Price.
Again, thank you, everyone, for your presentations. One very positive thing, I want to just say, actually, I want to say a few things about this. I'm very grateful that this land is finally being redeveloped. I think the Holiday Inn site is badly in need of an upgrade. So thank you for doing that. One of the things I think that was overlooked was we noticed that you mentioned the cycle track. Very glad to see that in the plan. I assume that's bidirectional cycle track?
Correct.
Okay. Raised?
Raised.
One of the areas of concern for me would be the turn-ins off of Fort Myer Drive. That would be slightly problematic for a cycle track, you know, those right turns and conflicts that would create with the cycle track. But again, I'm ecstatic to see it in there. And glad that we're going to finally have a conference center. I think that is a great idea. I also would agree with a lot of the people on the dais here that I think you're overparked I think there's parking to be had. I don't think it necessarily needs to be all housed within your development. And I would encourage you to go further and look and do a little bit more research on that. I think you would find a lot of support for that within this body. Thank you.
Commissioner Calkins.
Also very excited to see this site coming through. I have a few quick questions. The first one pings off of Commissioner Price's. So this is going to be a raised cycle track. How is the separation going to be done with the pedestrian walkways? Because I work very close by the wharf. And what I've found from experience is that these raised cycle tracks don't function as cycle tracks, they function as extended sidewalks. And in the locations that I've seen them where they're actually at grade with curbs separated from the roadways and then at a different grade from the sidewalks, that they're actually much more functional and effective as a bicycle facility. So whether or not staff has talked to the applicants about that and looked at use cases in the region and how effective they are either at grade or at roadway is something that maybe when we come to vote on this, we'll find a little bit more about. My second question kind of pings off of all of the same ones about parking. I do think people are strongly starting to transition to Uber and Lyft in our region, and as much as that creates different challenges, a lot of people don't want to drive to events anymore. They want to be picked up and they want to be dropped off, and that's a different challenge, but I do think it should play into our consideration of what type of parking is needed long-term. And I'm actually going to ping off of another thing that staff said, that the significant height of the parking garage is just architectural. I think it's actually a transportation issue too, because if you have an uncomfortable, high, deactivated facade along a roadway, it makes me not want to walk as much. And that's a pedestrian and transportation issue. So it's almost twofold, that it creates too much height in the parking garage, as well as the fact that it brings that many more vehicle trips that are then parked, and maybe they might be Uber and Lyft trips if not, but then at least we don't have to park them and it doesn't create an uncomfortable facade for pedestrians.
Does staff or the applicant want to talk about the design of the cycle track to Commissioner?
I can just speak very briefly. I'm very familiar with the wharf as well, and I've been witness to that cycle track sidewalk, and I'm puzzled by it, and our staff is aware of that, and we haven't done all the details on that, but we know the problems with the wharf, so I think we'll bring that knowledge to working with the applicant on the design of that, and whether it's separation, whether it's some height differentials, whether it's materials, we'll work to make it work. And you're absolutely correct with respect to the bulk as well, and I think that's what I was trying to get at. There are design elements that discourage people from walking, and that is absolutely a transportation issue. So thank you.
Commissioner Slatt, might I address that for a moment? Bob Bushkoff with the applicant with Dittmar Company. One of the slides that Dennis put up there, it says above-grade parking should be wrapped. And again, I would challenge you to take a look at the facade. We have Michael Foster here as our architect to kind of identify where the parking is on the facade. That's number one. And number two, the first 3 stories at grade level where the porte cochere is, where the restaurant is, where the frontage is on Lee Highway, that's not parking. That's all pedestrian accessible frontage with activation with the hotel lobby, with activation from the restaurant. So you don't have blank walls facing the street at the first 30 feet of the building. So I just want to, I'm happy to sit down and go through the plans with you and kind of show you that, but I just wanted to make sure I pointed that out.
Great, thank you. I did just want to throw in real quick. I feel like part of the issue with the wharf is that the sidewalk there is narrower than really is comfortable for the amount of pedestrians that are there. And this has a 10 to 12 foot sidewalk in addition to the cycle track, which should help. And there is a landscape, like a 3-foot landscape buffer between the sidewalk and the cycle track. They're not right up against each other. So I'm extremely hopeful that this will be a more successful design. Commissioner Yuri?
Hi. I would just like to shift gears and talk about residential parking this time. So I'm thinking back to what Steph was talking about and how we're trying to continuously reduce the amount of parking that gets built out. And thinking back to the guidelines provided by the residential parking working group, in this area, we say that a minimum is about 0.2 for a parking ratio, right? And this building is going to be parked at about a 0.7, 0.698 for residential. Given the place that this site is in, given its proximity to Metro Rail buses, given its proximity to shopping and retail and restaurants, what does the applicant think drives that difference between the 0.2 that the working group suggests and what is actually being provided by this building? Because it's not clear to me at all.
So I can lead off first, but I mean, Bob, go ahead. But I think that in part it's leasing and it's Ditmar's experience across the county, working with all kinds of different buildings and their experience renting apartments. So, I mean, but if there's anything you want to add to that.
Our utilizations out the corridor and.
Well, our portfolio, significant portions along the RV corridor and near metro stations. We don't have any building that's parked under a 1. We also don't have any utilization that's under a 1. And that's including our last lease up at Virginia Square Towers in 2015. Parking is in demand, not for driving to work. I think everybody's consideration is, oh, they're going to park, drive, and work at 8 o'clock in the morning. That's not what we see. And that's why the Wells study says that the trips aren't generated like that. They park, they want a car to go pick a place, wineries, back home. The trips aren't, the parking is desired, and it's part of our business model. It's something that we do to rent units. The other side of that is we have done comps, which we are going to get to Dennis in the Roslyn area, and the utilization in Roslyn at any applicable comp is well over 0.6. So we're not seeing, and that's true. I mean, so again, we're going to send the comps, and we're obviously going to put our utilization on there because that's our model. But we are seeing parking in the multifamily sector is still part of the rental market.
To add that briefly, we're working both on comps for the conference facility specifically, but also predicting that question and hearing similar comments at SPRC. We wanted to put together a chart that shows, what are the properties in the RB corridor? What are they approved at? What is their current utilization at? Because I think that was a question at SPRC. It's a question a lot of folks have had. And Ditmar, having good relationships with a lot of folks in the business community around here, is able to call some of those companies up and figure out where they're at with their parking right now. So we can at least get you some of that data.
Yeah, and I think part of it for me is I'm just trying to figure out how we can see 3 different site plans in relatively similar positions in terms of transit access, in terms of retail access, in terms of grocery access, and we can get, 3 to 6 different parking ratios. So the comps would be very helpful.
Well, I think one notion that might be useful is, again, I can't speak to what the business plan is for these other applicants, but our business plan is to build this and hold this. So we have to build it so it will work for the next 50 years. Some of these folks build it and they sell it, so their motivation is a little bit different. Our parking spaces are expensive. We don't want to build more parking spaces than we think we need. Nobody does. But some of these other folks, if you look at the guidelines, and again, remember, those are guidelines, not policy. We sat at the working group table while that was being discussed. The zoning code is 1 1/8 per unit. In CO Roslyn, it's 1 per unit. Some of the developers at that table wanted it as low as 0.4 or 0.2. The reason they wanted it low is because they wanted to build less parking, and the county was charging them to build less parking. So by lowering those ratios, the county said, okay, we're not going to charge you to build those. The flip side is the guidelines also allow you to build up to 1.6 spaces a unit without being charged. So there's a very broad range of spaces that can be built. Again, it's not just on the lower end, it's also on the upper end. Everybody has a little bit of a different business model. These units are also going to rent at $3.5, $4, $4.5 a square foot. The folks that are renting these have cars, and they're going to, and go next door to our friends at Turnberry, there's folks there with 2 and 3 cars. It's just the nature of the demographics of the folks that we expect to be in here. If we don't have the spaces for those folks, they will go rent somewhere else. We get residents up in the Roslyn-Boston corridor, specifically Virginia Square, because our neighbors have 1 space per unit. They get a couple people in that, and for a 2-bedroom, they can't park them. In our building, we can park them, we get those residents. So, and they won't leave because they can park. Again, I understand you're trying to get rid of the single occupancy vehicle trips and all that, But again, getting back to what you said, Commissioner, it's not going to be fewer cars coming to the building. Possibly they could go park somewhere else at Central Place or somewhere, but they're going to be driving around the streets. Those are going to impact traffic, as opposed to us being able to house them in the building. They come to the conference, they get off the street, they're not driving around looking for other spaces. So again, there is some benefit to that, both from public safety, traffic reduction, et cetera. So again, it's our point of view, it's our business model. I know it differs from a lot of what you guys are thinking and what staff's thinking, but again, we're going to own and operate this for the next 50, 60 years. It's got to be done right.
Anybody else?
Thank you.
All right, I think that's it. We'll see you. SPRC.
Our next item is item number 6, the Crystal Houses site plan info item, and I'll turn it over to the applicant.
And I will be up in a second. I'm gonna let these guys get out of the way first. All right, I'm just going to get going. It's quite late at this point. Nicholas Cummings here again on behalf of the applicant, also with Walsh Colucci still.
Welcome back.
Brief background again before Wells & Associates gets into something that's going to be shorter than the last presentation you just saw. I think we have a little bit less to address here, although it is a significant and exciting new development in Crystal City. I love this 3D rendering of the block. It really gives you a sense of the scale of what we're doing. The project is a major site plan amendment to Site Plan 13, specifically for the Crystal Houses block. Site Plan 13 also includes the Towers block just to the north. Some of you may be familiar with the property from the 2017 approval for Crystal Houses 3. That was an interim plan that did not pursue a rezoning to CO Crystal City in accordance with the new sector plan. We are now proposing a new plan for the full block, consistent with the sector plan, and rezoning the entire property to CO Crystal City, also including the parking lot right there, which is the building that's kind of closest to you. That's Crystal House 5, and that is not currently part of Site Plan 13, but will be added to it as part of this application. There are 828 units in the existing 12-story 1960s era buildings on the block. Hopefully you can tell which ones those are in this rendering because they're a little bit older. Right in the middle there, labeled, if you can see it a little bit easier than me, Crystal Houses 1 and 2. You'll see that labeling is going to be important tonight just because there's a lot of buildings involved. We propose adding 6 new buildings of various sizes as infill development. These include Crystal House 3, which is up on the northern end of the site there. And that is 5 to 11 stories and 432 units. And you can get a sense of that height tapering with the 3D image here, which is great. Crystal House 4, 6 to 11 stories and 222 units. Crystal House 4 is the one closest to us right there on Eads, you can see it stepping down just to the side there. Crystal House 5, which is 7 stories and 81 units. That's on the parking lot site closest to the Restaurant Row properties. Crystal House 6, which is blocked here by Crystal House 1, but you'll see it in site plan view later. That's the smallest building at 5 stories and 63 units. And then we have Crystal House 7 and 8, which were added more recently as we started to discuss with staff how to better accomplish the sector plan along Fern Street and really fill out the rest of the block, finish the frontage. And those are townhome style multifamily units. We're proposing 21 of those along Fern Street. They are all less than 35 feet tall. They match, well, there's a height map in the sector plan that tells you how tall the buildings can be, but it's intended to match the height of the single family homes across the street. Counting the existing units, the total number of residential units on the block will be 1,647 with 819 new residential units across this entire community. All of the proposed development generally conforms to the height and massing recommendations of the sector plan, and the buildings, and this is important, are located where the sector plan envisioned new development. We followed the concept plan for the sector plan here pretty closely. All parking for the new buildings and some of the parking for the existing buildings, which is also important, will be located in below-grade garages. There is and was substantial surface parking on the site serving Crystal Houses 1 and 2. We have so far eliminated a lot of that, and we are looking, as we've gotten comments from SPRC, at removing more of it, continuing to work on that. With that, I think it's time to turn it over to Wells. So. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm John Schick with Wells & Associates. I think Nick did a nice overview of the proposal. Crystal houses 3 through 8 being added to the site. I'm sure everyone's familiar with the site. The site is just west of the main Crystal City area. It's bounded generally by 18th Street south to the north, down to 22nd Street, and then Eads runs the eastern flank of the site, and Fern to the west. Today, the main site is served by 5 access points. There's 2 along Fern, 1 on 18th, 1 on Eads, 1 on 22nd, and then the smaller parking lot behind Restaurant Row has 2 curb cuts as well, 1 on Eads and then 1 on 22nd. So here's an overview of the proposed site. As Nick mentioned, the proposal is to add 5 new buildings, Crystal houses 3 through 8. You can see the 2 buildings in the middle, Crystal houses 1 and 2. Those are obviously the existing buildings. And then around the perimeter are the new buildings. Starting down in the bottom left corner is Crystal House 5. Then across 22nd Street is Crystal House 4. Continuing along Eads, the larger building in the bottom right is Crystal House 3. And then moving up 18th is Crystal House 6. And then 7 and 8 are the townhouse units up along Fern Street. The chart there shows the units per building totaling 1,647 units. We conducted a traffic study. It looked at 11 study intersections. Counts were collected in 2018. As is typical with applications in Arlington, we scoped it with DES staff. What we found was all the study intersections currently shown in the graphic under existing conditions operate acceptable levels of service. We noticed max pedestrians from our counts were observed at the Eads and 18th Street intersections, and then max bicycle traffic is along 18th Street. As Nick mentioned, the proposed development includes 819 additional dwelling units, which correlate to 133 AM peak hour trips and 157 PM peak hour trips. These rates do assume a 60% non-auto reduction, which is what you find when you look at the census data. When you look at future conditions in the 2026 condition, we added in 5 pipeline developments as listed there, which is another development in the area that's currently approved or under construction that would be open in 2026 and operating. And we also assumed a 0.5% growth rate at the intersections. And then a summary of our results, we found that all the intersections would continue to operate at acceptable levels of service with the addition of Crystal houses 3 through 8. This graphic just shows the nearby transit facilities. I think everyone's very familiar that we are in close proximity, about 700 feet from the Crystal City Metro Station. There's also numerous bus lines and Capital Bike Share stations nearby. Next graphic just shows the vehicular routes. With the proposal, we are cleaning up a little bit of the internal circulation, to make it clearer and more easily to navigate. As you can see, we're consolidating an access point up along Fern Street to just have a single access point, and then we'll maintain the access points along 18th, Eads, and 22nd. A few things to note here is the blue arrows on there represent all the garage access points. As Nick mentioned, a substantial amount of the parking is now being moved to below-grade garage parking. And then over the building that's being constructed behind the Restaurant Row would have access along 22nd Street to serve the garage. And then there would be a handful of surface spaces behind that building, as well as loading access. This graphic shows pedestrian circulation through the new site. As you can see, there's numerous walkways, some of which are existing, others that are being expanded and or improved with the redevelopment. All of the pedestrian walkways are ADA accessible that we're providing, and there's a few crosswalks as well being proposed up along Fern Street just to provide additional crossings. Where you see some of those purple lines up through the townhouses, There's steps there because there's a little bit of grade. Ramps are also being provided to ensure that ADA accessibility is met. This shows nearby bicycle facilities. As I mentioned previously, there's numerous bike share stations in the area, the closest being up at the corner of 18th and Eads, like right on top of our site, that has 11 docks, as well as another station a little further down Eads that has 15 docks. This plan also shows the on-street bike facilities. So along Eads, there's bike lanes. This map's a little outdated. The bike lanes do now extend all the way up Eads to Army-Navy Drive. There's also bike lanes along 18th Street, and then there is on-street bike facilities along Fern and 22nd. To summarize the parking, Nick mentioned previously that a majority of the surface parking is being relocated to garage spaces. This just provides a brief summary of how the parking kind of delineates amongst the buildings. You can see in total, we'd be providing 210 surface spaces, 1,000 or so garage spaces. So about 16% of our total parking would be on the surface. But as Nick also discussed, we're still looking at ways to move more of that to structure. That gives you a parking ratio of about 0.75, which is in line with CO, Crystal City guidelines. And then the bicycle parking, those are just the requirements of 659 Class 1 spaces and 33 Class 3. And we would be providing those spaces. Each building will have bicycle rooms, and racks will be provided at the building entrances for visitor. This graphic summarizes on-street parking restrictions around the site. I'm sure most people are familiar. Majority of the frontages are paid parking, 12-hour, and then there's a good chunk of Eads that has no parking on the opposite side. And then finally, we have here our preliminary TDM plan. A lot of this is very standard. I mean, it would involve elements of physical facilities improvements, a parking management plan, promotion services, performance monitoring. One thing I did want to mention is specifically to the physical facilities is we are proposing streetscape improvements along all the frontages to bring it up to the Crystal City sector plan guidance, which has a 6-foot buffer and 6-foot sidewalk. So that would be a major upgrade from the existing conditions that are out there today. And we'd be happy to answer any questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Is there also a staff presentation or
No,
not?
there is no staff presentation. So any questions will be communicated back to staff.
Okie dokie. Commissioner Wadsworth?
Okay, well, thank you for the very clear and concise presentation. Appreciate that. I think this is an excellent project. I especially like the what you showed, I think, on the 6th slide there that shows the improved circulation within the property. I live right near here, so I'm very familiar with the traffic situation there. I am concerned, though, about the bike facility. The county adopted a new master bike plan that says you have to improve bike facilities when you build a new project. And it would be much better to have fully protected lanes rather than the plastic bollards, which are ugly and break and get knocked over by cars and are expensive to maintain over time. So I don't know if maybe this was already in development before the plan was updated, but I don't know if you could speak to that.
So I know that we've talked with staff about what we can achieve on EAD specifically is what you're talking about,
exactly,
right?
yep.
Exactly. So we're talking about what can fit where and what's going to put the pressure on the streetscape and how wide can we get the sidewalk and utilities and all that. I think that's going to also impact what we can do with protected lanes. I mean, Steve, did you have anything to add to that or? Come on up. It's a worthwhile question.
Been lurking in the back for a while.
Would help if we had a staff.
One more. Hi, my name is Stephen Liam with Bowman Consulting, civil engineer. We did talk to staff about having more protected curb and raised curbs at the entrances and where the driveway entrances were going to go. So that's something that we're going to work with staff and pursue and look at.
Yeah, so I think for action, we can kind of come back with a real plan and I'll make sure I note to Jane that that's something that you're particularly interested in.
Great, thank you. And also maybe some consideration of how that would interact with all the bus traffic that's there. And also the same comment I had for the Verizon site, to make sure you keep the Crystal City Citizens Review Council updated, because they need to look at all of the development holistically that's going on in the area.
We'd be thrilled to appear in front of them so I can pursue that.
Okay, great.
Yeah, it hadn't been part of my normal routine. We reached out to all the civic associations in the area, but that's a good point.
Yeah,
We can do
it's
that.
just kind of the one-stop shop to talk to all the civic associations, so, yep, thanks.
Commissioner Clement.
Yeah, the other Crystal City project that was presented tonight has parking ratio of about 0.44, and you have a parking ratio of 0.7. I think your residents would be much better served if you converted that surface parking to green space.
Thank you. Definitely a comment that we've heard. We have eliminated a lot of the surface parking. We're looking at a couple more sections where you see some of the larger spots, and we have some interesting thoughts about what we might do with those, and I think that we'll have that for the next SPRC meeting. And then there's also just some incidental parking left over at that point along the internal circulation areas. Maybe we'd look at converting some of that to parallel. Maybe some of it remains as visitor or for leasing. At that point, across a 16 plus acre site, we're looking at far less surface parking than we have right now. Point taken. We do have, I want to note, 2 substantial new parks that are going to be implemented with this project and a whole lot of additional green space that is not going to necessarily be a public park or a public easement, but is open green space, including the plaza between buildings 7 and 8, sort of like entry landscaped area that's going to lead to a pedestrian path going through the site into the new Central Park. So we're doing a lot with this project to add new green space to Crystal City and exceeding the sector plan goals for the size of those parks. So point taken, but I just wanted to make sure that we noted that because we feel very proud of that, actually.
Commissioner Lantelmi.
Just like to join the comments, and you will be hearing it, of course, it's telegraphing a little bit of what's going to come up at transportation at the next SBRC. Not surprised to know that CO Crystal City does indicate parking should all be underground, should not be surface parking. This is a prime site right by a subway station, walking distance to VRE, transit-rich, one of the most transit-rich parcels in this county. That said, it's also a potential win-win because this is an amazing site that has the potential for a lot of green space with very, very big, high density. So it's really a win-win all around. If we can simply get rid of that surface parking, and put in the protected bike track, the cycle track, this is like the ideal project for this county. It can be a model for others if we can get that done the way we think. So,
Commissioner Calkins.
I just have a few quick questions. You noted the existing capital bike share stations in the area. This is a pretty big site, and it's going to be a significant increase in residential units on the site. You guys planning on adding another complementary station, maybe on the other corner, or expanding the station that exists?
Not something I think that we had specifically thought about yet, but I'll bring that back to the client and absolutely raise it with them.
I mean, how many units did we say it was again?
819 new units and about 1,647
So
total.
11 docks seems a little inadequate for that big of a site. My second question actually goes to maybe something that you're not quite as ready yet. Do you know what the ownership pattern of the units versus townhouses, or if any of these buildings are going to be condo? I would assume the townhouses are going to be for purchase, or?
Yeah, I think that would be a safe assumption, but we always entitle these projects with the ability to do either.
Okay.
I think that with such a large project, my client would be comfortable with me saying that there will be consideration of some ownership units on this site. Absolutely.
The only
So-
reason I asked that question is just making sure that in the site plan that there's very specific like language and strength to the pedestrian connectivity through those townhouse communities. If they do go purchase, that there's not fences put up in the long term or people's concerns about other people being in that open space.
That's an excellent point and came up during at least a meeting, if not during SPRC. And I, again, have checked with our client and they are comfortable with public access easements through, and we could bring up the site plan and show you, but it's essentially that entry larger park between 7 and 8 through there, of course, but also that the plaza between, call it a pocket park,
8 and
whatever,
8,
between
8A.
8A and 8B.
My bigger question was 8A and 8B. and
Yeah,
making
I think
sure.
that we're comfortable with putting a public access easement there, and I think it's a fair concern, and so we're
And then
comfortable
one
with
of my last comments was, I know that we're still talking about getting rid of some of the parking. I think maybe keeping some of that as hardscape and using it as like a training area for kids who are learning how to bike or things along those lines would actually be a really great use in this area. There is a lot of residential, but I'm sure a lot of these communities are going to be concerned about traffic in the long term. And with this many people, you're going to have a lot of kids on site. So if we can create like a community-oriented use of that space that focuses maybe on teaching kids how to bike, and then we get a cycle track and there's a safe space for them to eventually bike on street, it might be a great progression long-term of the larger community.
Noted. I think that's a good suggestion.
Cool. I just want to say I think this is a great project that is getting better even than it started as it goes through SPRC. The streetscape improvements are going to be a huge boon to walkability in the area. I love how potentially green this area is going to be and how many more people we're going to be able to house in walking distance to Metro. It's fantastic. I just want to associate myself with Commissioner Wadsworth's remarks about the protected bike lane on Eads. I really think part of that streetscape improvement needs to be hardscaping, like really permanentizing that protected bike lane, including eliminating the bus conflict. We need a floating bus island there so that the buses can stop in their lane, discharge passengers onto a floating bus area, and then those passengers will cross the bike lane to the sidewalk when it's an appropriate and safe time to do so. That will both eliminate conflicts with bikes and speed up our buses. If they don't have to pull over, then they don't have to wait for an opportunity to pull back into Ead Street, waiting for congested traffic to get out of the way. So that's a win-win there, and I think would just make this project over the top great. Any final thoughts from anyone? Commissioner Price.
I agree with pretty much what a lot has been said on the dais here, especially regarding the interaction between with the bike lane and the buses along South Eads. I think it's important that we have a protected bike lane there, and we also have to be cognizant again of the of buses along that route. I don't know if you've thought about in terms of parking. I think that needs to be dealt with, but have you ever thought about talking with Zipcar, because it seems like there's a lot of density in this area, that possibly a relationship with Zipcar and bringing in Zipcar in some of theirs, so there's some shared use of vehicles and not necessarily the need for more parking, because you're in a prime spot. I mean, with Amazon coming in and all the people needing places to live, this is an absolute prime location. So congratulations on a great development, and I look forward to seeing it come to fruition. Thank you.
All right, that's it. Thank you very much. See you at SPRC.
Our next item is other business. One item is our next regular meeting is September 5th. This technically is our July meeting. This is technically our July meeting.
This meeting right now is technically.
No, so the next regular meeting will be September 5th.
I am looking to organize a walking tour of some sort for the commission in August. So if you have opinions about where we should be walking, what we should be looking at, areas, in August.
Could it be an e-scooter?
Bring a parasol.
How about an e-scooter
Crystal
tour?
City Underground, it's air conditioned.
Crystal City Underground. Great.
Forget walking tour, e-scooter tour.
We're getting off the rails. If you have opinions, if one of those opinions, we should do it in July instead of August because that's cooler. I'm not sure that's true. No. It's the month we've got off from a meeting, so that's when we walk. Let me know. Any other commission thing for the good of the commission? All right, great. Thanks, everybody. We're adjourned.
Yeah, I've noticed the Crystal City Underground keeps getting better and better. Obviously, where you live. Yeah. Check you promoted the Crystal City. As compared to
the same.